Sorry, this is Peter Rogoff doing a sound check. Can somebody hear me?
Yes, Peter, I can hear you.
Great, thanks very much.
If folks can please take their seats. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Recording in progress.
The VTA Board Workshop meeting of Friday, October 20th, 2023 is called to order. Before we begin, thanks everybody for being here. Just a few housekeeping items. If we need to evacuate, our assembly area is at the parking lot at the corner of North First and River Oaks across from Starbucks. The nearest AED device is in the main lobby by the security guard. Restrooms are outside the double doors. To our members of the public, thanks for joining us. I will announce when the board is ready to receive public comment. In-person attendees who want to speak are encouraged to complete a blue speaker card and submit it to our board office staff before the item is heard. Speaker cards are available at the public information table. Virtual attendees can use the raise hand function in Zoom or press *9 if you're dialing in. We'll be inviting those who attended in person to speak first. After that, we'll invite those who raised their hand in Zoom to make their comments. To my colleagues, please keep your mics muted until you're ready to speak. And if you want to speak, please call my attention by raising your hand. I'd also like to request that everyone in the room mute your devices so we can avoid audio feedback. And Theodora, please call the roll.
Ex officio Abicoga. Absent. Blankley. Here. Davis. Here. Dean. Absent. Foley. Here. Jane. Absent. Jimenez. Absent. Kamei. Alternate member Kamei. Thank you. Lee. Lee Ing. Here. Thank you. Lopez. Absent. Mahan. Here. Thank you. Montano. Absent. Rennie. Absent. Torres. Absent. Turner. Absent. Vice Chairperson Chavez. Here. Thank you. Chair Burt.
Here.
Thank you. Chairperson, you have a quorum, and I do note for the record that Member Lopez has arrived.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to the workshop item. Agenda item 2.1 is to review and discuss the new baseline cost and schedule estimates and financial plan for VTA's BART Silicon Valley Phase 2 extension project. Our purpose today is to take a close look into the cost estimates and timeline for delivering VTA's BART Silicon Valley Phase 2. Our project delivery staff, led by Gary Griggs, prepared a presentation showing the major reasons behind the increase in the cost estimate and the longer time frame to revenue service. I know my colleagues need no reminder, but for the benefit of the public, what we are discussing today is a cost estimate. This is the latest, but not the last, estimate and is based on better information, more refined design, and the current value of money. Previous estimates were based on the best information available at the time and a construction environment that changed dramatically over the last few years. VTA isn't alone in dealing with the combined impact of inflation, supply chain issues, and scarcity of resources, both human and material. All major infrastructure projects are facing the same pressures. I believe we're equipped to handle it. After the new cost estimate is released, some of the media started speculating on armchair engineering the project. It's important to remember that this project is intensely scrutinized. It is examined by the independent actual experts in the field. The Federal Transit Administration carefully monitors the project and its potential impact on VTA itself. But most importantly, the project is run by VTA. Between our highway projects, express lane projects, transit projects, and indeed Phase 1 of this project, we have an enviable record for delivering projects on time and on budget. Redesigning and rethinking may cause delay. Delay is costly. At this point, the cost of delay in the project is estimated at approximately $30 million per month. Rethinking carefully vetted decisions could also cause delay that makes the project undeliverable. That doesn't mean we as a board with the fiduciary responsibility to deliver this project will not be closely monitoring progress. That includes decisions regarding project delivery, costs, and funding approaches. To that end, I'm creating an ad hoc BART Phase 2 Oversight Committee. This committee will be responsible for overseeing all aspects of the project and reporting back to the full board on any and all issues that raise concern. This ad hoc committee will be charged with the oversight and providing recommendations to the board by the end of calendar year 2025 or sooner. I propose as committee members Vice Chair Chavez, Directors Jane, Davis, Omar Torres, and myself. I further propose this ad hoc committee select a smaller group to closely monitor the finances of the project, assisted by VTA's Auditor General in addition to appropriate VTA staff. I propose this committee take the place of the previously constituted ad hoc Station Enhancement Committee. For today's workshop, I want to keep in mind that we are building for the future. This project builds a transportation system for the future of today's travelers and our children. It will relieve the ever-increasing roadway congestion, fight climate change, and help address the equity gap in Silicon Valley by giving access to public transportation to all citizens. This project will help secure our economic future as we compete with other regions around the world. We don't want people looking back in the future and wondering why we lack the vision to deliver this promise. And with that, I'd like to ask our General Manager, CEO, Carolyn Gannott, to begin the presentation. Carolyn?
Thank you, Chair Burt, and thank you all for attending today over this very, very important project that our agency is delivering. So I just want to go through a couple things. Today, I know this agenda may look very much like the one from the board meeting, but it is actually going to go into a lot more detail. I'm just going to have a few opening remarks, and then Gary Griggs will go over the new baseline cost and schedule estimates, and then there'll be a financial plan overview by Greg Richardson. Next. So as the chair mentioned, this really is a multi-generational, long-term transit investment for the region, not just for Santa Clara County, but for the region. And it, as I mentioned before, and I think we go to the next slide, it really does complete the remaining 6 miles to have passenger transport ring the bay and provide access throughout the region on a rail system that travels at very fast speeds throughout the East Bay and will be connecting to Caltrain electrification, which will go up and down the corridor to San Francisco. This project is very, very important to help complete the vision of the BART system. We are partners with BART. We're very happy to be partners with BART. We're very proud of the system we've already built in this county. We're proud that we're actually being part of the BART system and that we continue to provide the access for the future generations and moving forward. I do want to say that today I also have Peter Rogoff online. You met him at the board meeting, but he's here to answer any question as well in regards to what he had presented the other evening. So he's online if you could see him. Just a reminder, this is about the 6 stations for those in the audience who don't know. 6 miles, 4 stations. I didn't add 2 stations. 6 miles, 4 stations, 3 underground, and the one at Santa Clara Station. It also includes a Newhall Yard and maintenance facility to help support the BART system. There's been some questions sometimes about the Newhall Yard facility and whether we need another maintenance facility. The closest maintenance facility for us is the Hayward facility, which is the largest facility for the BART system, but it already handles a majority of the efforts when it comes to long-term maintenance, the overhaul that will happen for the whole system for the vehicles. But this maintenance facility is very, very important so that we also are not deadheading our trains back up to the system. That can be very costly in the long-term operations for our system. And so the Newhall Yard is another maintenance facility as BART expands their fleet to over 1,000 vehicles. So we will be having roughly 200 vehicles that will be able to be maintained into this facility at Newhall Yard. Next is just quickly, I briefly went over the project benefits last time, and they're listed up here about 2 million people in Santa Clara County gaining access to 3.5 million Bay Area jobs. But it's also about people within the rest of the area coming down to meet, to take jobs in Santa Clara County. And I know one of the biggest supporters for us over many of the years has been the delegation that's outside of Santa Clara County. Representative Eric Swalwell has been always monitoring what is going on with this project so that his constituency in the East Bay can come into Santa Clara County and get jobs here, as well as the northern Contra Costa County. So those are really important. That tells you how important this project is that when people are reaching out for them to understand when is this project going to be built so that my residents can get jobs in your county, and that's really, 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 really critical. The other thing is it also, in general, helps to reduce the annual reduction of the overall carbon footprint. And then the other area is really San Jose State students, Santa Clara University, and those in our generation that's going to be coming up and sitting in these seats that we're sitting in today. And, this allows opportunities for 35,000 San Jose students, for example, to a large portion of those to be able to take transit efficiently into Santa Clara County. There's many people who have been and who sit in this room who might remember taking the 180 bus, and now they get to Berryessa and they're taking another bus system. But to be able to get directly on BART from wherever they're coming in the Bay Area to those to their classes, to their evening classes, to wherever they need to go, I think that's really important because students are a major driver right now for transit in the industry, and they're going to be who is going to be continue to use transit in the future. So I'm really excited for what this project is going to do, the investment that it will be in Santa Clara County, not just for transportation, but really for the economic development of San Jose and for the whole entire Santa Clara County. So I want to move forward. Just today, I'm going to briefly tell you what you were told at the last meeting. These are the punch lines on what was done at the last board meeting. 12.237 billion is the estimate, which includes contingency for the BART project. This is what we have submitted to FTA for their review. It's a 2036 revenue service, including contingency. So when we talk about contingency, this is based on risks that we see could potentially happen on the project, many of the risks, but that we choose to mitigate. And our goal, as always, is to come in lower than that number and to come in faster than the schedule that we have. The funding sources that we're using are federal. The FTA New Starts is what we are, the last piece that we're really hoping to get outside of the $375 million from MTC, which hopefully votes on that in October. And the state and regional funding, TIRCP, the MTC and monies that will be voted on next week, I think, and the regional Measure 3. And then local sales tax measures, both 2000 Measure A, 2016 Measure B, and I don't want to forget about the 2008 Measure B that helps provide the operating source. Next. What I want to make sure is that we walk through the steps clearly right now about what we are planning on doing with the Federal Transit Administration. We will have all of our, what they say, local committed after this week and after October. So what we're looking at right now is we delivered the cost, the schedule, and the risk analysis, our risk matrix, to the Federal Transit Administration last week. FTA will do their risk assessment towards the end of this year, November or December this year. They will go in and take a look at what we are looking at, what our risk matrix. Primarily what they do is they strip out all the contingency out of the project, and then they build up a new base cost, and then they look at what is the probability of different risks to happen, and then they will define a number for us. They will also do that with the schedule. So it's a very intensive few-day workshop here, and then a lot of work that's done on that the consultants that they bring in do as well. At that point, they'll define sort of what that number is. We'll develop the funding plan for that. So this 12.237 may stand. It could go higher. It could go lower. I know a lot of people say it doesn't go lower, but we've seen a couple projects go lower recently when they've gone into the federal, into the request for new starts. Then we do our official submittal for request for entry into New Starts Engineering. Our goal right now is to be able to get into the president's budget for 2025. That's really important to us so that we're able to get the FFGA coming up. The next is the approval for entry into New Starts Engineering. Quickly after that, within the next few months, we'll turn around and submit for the full funding grant agreement. And then we do hope to attain that, anticipate that at the end of the year 2024. So it's a fairly aggressive schedule. FTA knows that, but FTA is working closely with us. They've been great partners on this project. So I just want everybody to understand where we're going right now with this project. We'd love to get the full funding grant agreement in 2024. A lot of that has to do with the concerns we have with the change in administration, if there's a change in administration. So we would want to make sure that we're positioned well to get it while there's so much support for the infrastructure bill that our legislators have passed in Washington. Next slide is, I'm going to turn this over to Gary so that he could go over this, and then over to Greg Richardson for the financials. We could take questions after Gary's presentation and then after Greg's presentation, but I don't know if there's any clarifying questions right now before we start.
Well, let's go ahead and open it up. Does anyone have any clarifying questions before we proceed? I don't see any.
Okay, Gary.
Okay, thank you. Chair Burt, Vice Chair Chavez, Directors, General Manager Ganot. I'm Gary Griggs, the Program Officer for Silicon Valley Phase 2 Extension. We come before you today to discuss the new baseline cost and schedule estimates in more detail than we were discussing at the board meeting on October 5th. A little bit of background, the General Manager brought me into VTA approximately a year ago to help with the BART extension project, having been involved in quite a number of other BART projects here in the past, as well as the VTA light rail program. There are many challenges to be faced in a role like this, and one of the greatest, I think, is trying to forecast the future. That's what we're doing here and looking at what these costs and schedules will be in the future. I've spent my entire career delivering rail transit systems around the world in almost every continent, and most of the systems here in the U.S. that I've been involved in. So it's an honor to be here to do a project here, another rail project here in what I consider my home, the Bay Area. My passion for rail transit started very early in my career when I was working for a large global construction company, and my assignment was to work on the extension of the Seoul subway system in Seoul, Korea. It was an intense project, two 15-mile lines crisscrossing the center of Seoul. And it was absolutely essential because they had tremendous congestion and mobility issues as we see around the world and here in our own city. What really generated my passion was opening day. We were able to build that project in about 5 years, so it was quite fast. But when we opened the line on opening day, we had 1 million riders on each line. And that's what drew my attention to what I wanted to do with my career, is to address these issues and do everything possible we can to address the global infrastructure and environmental crisis that we're faced with and that is really threatening our very existence. I want to go through, no, I think I went the wrong way. I want to go through, as preparatory to our discussions of the cost and schedule, to talk about the progress that we've made over the last year. We have restructured the delivery program, both in the way the consultant organization is organized as well as in the contracting approaches, and I'll talk more about that later. We have progressed the engineering to 30% and beyond on all aspects of the project, so we have a far better basis on which to do our cost and schedule forecasts. We have been working very closely with the contractor that we have on board, the Kiewit Shea Trailer venture, and who are responsible for the tunnel and track work contract, as well as doing the supportive excavation for the stations. That's a big part of the contract that's really driving the overall schedule. We've been accepted into FDA New Starts in December, which is very beneficial to the program, and we also were named in the president's budget $500 million. So there's been some good news over the last year as we continue to move forward with the program. All of this has resulted in a much better definition of the project and the ability to address the costs and schedule forecasts that we're discussing today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the organization and acknowledge the team that has got us here. We are in the lead. VTA is the owner of and responsible for the planning, design, and construction of the project. We have a lot of stakeholders involved, the cities, the counties, the ultimate riders. And then we're working very closely with BART, which is an extremely important relationship with BART as they work with us in the design and prepare for the operations and maintenance of the system. We have a program management team that we use in an integrated fashion with VTA to manage the overall program. And then we have a general engineering consultant team as well that's advancing the design of the other aspects of the program. And then we have the contract package 2, as we call it, the tunnel and track work contract with the contractor venture of Kiewit Shea Trailer. I've had the good fortune of working with all of these firms over the course of my career, and I'm happy to be here in Silicon Valley working with them again. I'd like to recognize a few people that are here today in the audience. First of all, I want to recognize Shane Edwards. He is the AGM and COO, Chief Operating Officer of BART. And he and I have been working very closely together to make sure that we have that strong alliance. He has one other key person with him, Nee Lee, who is also supporting the team. So I'm very pleased with the way that BART and VTA are working together on the project. I'd also like to recognize Mike Kolpak and Carrie Larson, the program director and deputy for the Kiewit Shea Trailer venture. And in particular, I want to recognize one of the VTA staff, Ronak Nayak. Ronak, over the year that I've been here, has been a close ally and a great supporter of mine. And in my career, I don't think I've worked with anybody that did better in terms of supporting me in advancing this project. So I really want to recognize him. I have told him quite often that I think he should be the one running the program, but he's too modest to take that on and maybe too wise to do it. But anyway, I just wanted to recognize a few people here, and there are many others that I'd like to recognize as well. But it's all about the team, and that's what has got us to the point we are today. So the primary objectives of the workshop are really to provide a more detailed discussion of the new baseline cost and schedule. And in particular, you've asked us to make comparisons between the previous cost and schedule forecasts and the current one. So we will be doing that. There were a lot of questions raised at the board meeting and in individual discussions that we want to address here to make sure that we do that. And then kind of the bottom line was that we really wanted to have a clear delineation of what's causing these changes in the cost and schedule. In particular, the economy we know is having a big impact. We know we've increased contingencies. Schedule is always a big driver of project, a lot of discussion of that. And then there have been refinements and design advancement that we'll be discussing. And then I would like to close it off by talking about some costs and schedule control measures that we should think about as we move forward on the program to strengthen that and do everything possible to maintain the forecasts that we're currently putting before you. So the most important thing is really we have to define the project. Really what we're talking about here, it's basically scope, schedule, cost, and risk. And the scope of the project is really defined by the project definition. So I wanted to just take a little time to walk through the timeline of how we got to where we are, why we have this particular project before us today, and some of the restrictions and limitations that go around that. So going back to 2000, when we have Measure A passed, and like many of the self-help counties in the state, our taxpayers are willing to pay to improve transportation mobility in their counties. And we're fortunate because we've seen some diminishment of funding at the federal and state level, but we're covering that now with this robust local funding. We, even prior to this, there was a lot of planning work done. We do alternatives analyses and major investment studies. But we got, in 2001, we got to where we came forward with the approved locally preferred alternative, but for the 16-mile project. And so that was approved in 2001. Then 2008, we had Measure B, and for especially looking at the operation and maintenance of the system. And then the VTA board commitment to build BART extension project in 2 phases. So we always face these types of challenges on projects. In this case, funding generated that need. So it was decided to have phase 1 and phase 2, which is a good decision. Phase 1 had groundbreaking in 2012. Phase 2 then renewed the planning efforts in 2014 because we had to basically go back and redo some of the environmental work. And then we had the 2016 Measure B. And then phase 2 environmental clearance took place in 2018. That was a big milestone for phase 2 when the 2 boards, BART and VTA, approved the project, and we received a record of decision from the Federal Transit Administration. A lot of work went into that. This is part of the work that went into it, okay? That's an environmental document. And that's only one volume of it. There are other volumes. So I just want the appreciation of what goes into the planning environmental work on a project like this. And when we get to that point, I want to also emphasize that we have serious restrictions on what we can do to the project beyond this point, once we've approved it and gone to the length that we have in terms of our outreach, community involvement, and decision-making. So we have limitations that we can't just change the project. We are able to do refinements to the project if we want to, and you'll be hearing and you've heard about some of those refinements we're making for the betterment project. But it is very important that that stays within the balance of the environmental document. Moving forward then on phase 1 opened in 2020 with great success. And then we submitted, in 2021, we submitted to the FTA Expedited Project Delivery Program. So we were participating in what was called the EPT program from FTA. Now, the problem with the Expedited Project Delivery Program was that the amount of federal funding we could get would be up to a maximum of 25%. So as a result of that, late last year in December, we were able to re-enter New Starts Engineering, where we had been originally. And that then gave us the opportunity to attract up to close to 50% of the federal funding as a share of our overall funding. And we also got a letter of no prejudice at that time in the amount of $9.3 billion, which was a record in terms of FTA. So that's where we really got back and moving forward with the program. So again, I just want to emphasize that the environmental document really is important. One of the aspects of the environmental document is there was an extensive review of the twin bore versus single bore option. And that was laid out very clearly in the environmental document. The decision that was made was to proceed with the single bore. To try to revisit that at this point in time would really set the project back seriously. So I think it's the time to move forward and probably not continue those discussions. There are some changes that could trigger some additional work, and that's really referred to as doing basically a reevaluation, some more limited role of it. I often get asked, why does it take us so long to do projects like this? And it is. It's something that in this country we take a lot of time, a lot of planning, and a lot of thinking to do these. Having worked in many other parts of the world, I can make some comparisons. One of the projects that I've been involved with here in the U.S. is the California High-Speed Rail project. So we've taken as long, if not longer, than we have here on this extension to try to move forward on California High-Speed Rail. And I think you're all probably familiar with that and hearing about it. And I actually managed that project for several years. So we moved forward. My former firm was overall program manager on it. But I also have been involved in China on the high-speed rail program. And while we've been doing the studies on high-speed rail California, and we've got good construction going on in the Central Valley, China has basically connected every major city in their country with high-speed rail. I don't know if you've had the chance to visit there. I was in China not too long ago, was able to ride from Beijing to Shanghai on their high-speed rail line. So other parts of the world are able to do things more quickly, and we need to find a better way to do it here. There's been a lot of discussion about streamlining these processes here. Now, other parts of the world cut the corners that we're not going to cut, because we really want to be good environmental stewards. We want to have a robust outreach program and input, and we want to make sure that we do that planning that's necessary. But I think we got to find some way that we can deliver these projects more quickly, because there is cost and schedule involved in all of this. In addition to the talking about the environmental process, I wanted to also emphasize in the decision-making that we've had on this project that we've had quite a large number of peer reviews undertaken, reviewing all sorts of things from operation and maintenance to the different tunnel approaches, twin bore versus single bore, how we organize the project, how we do the contract packaging, how we do the tunnel and track work contract. And recently, you've seen a couple of them. We had the APTA peer review, again, just having a final look at the twin bore, single bore. And then we also had a contract packaging and project delivery peer review. So these are a few that have taken place, but I just put them before you to emphasize the amount of thought that's gone into defining this project and how it's important that we accept that and move on. I would like to talk a little bit more about the contract packaging and project delivery. We have originally broken the overall program into 4 different contract packages. We have, as I mentioned earlier, the tunnel and track work contract to Kiewit Shea Trailer. That one was awarded in May of 2022, and that's known as the Progressive Design Build contract. It's a variation on the more traditional design build contract that I've spoken to the board about as well. So we have the other parts of the program, in particular the systems, the train control, communications, tracks and power. So we looked at that particular contract package, as well as the Newhall Yard and the Santa Clara Station and the other underground stations. And we, after considerable deliberation with the peer review group that we brought in, we decided that we would go to a design bid build approach. Maybe just to explain a little bit, design build means that you hire an entity to do both the design and construction of the project, as we've done with the Kiewit Shea Trailer. Design bid build means that the owner has the design completed and then proceeds to award construction contracts. So just wanted to go through and explain that we did go through that contract packaging and project delivery assessment. We brought transit professionals from other agencies from around the country and came up with the decision to proceed on this basis. We feel that for these other parts of the contract, that this better suits an mature operating system like BART. And it also allows us to coordinate with the tunnel and track work contract on these other contracts. And then it allows us to manage the cash flow as well. And it will help mitigate the risks that we have seen over the last 2 years in the current marketplace, especially in terms of inflation. And then finally, it just presents more bidding opportunities. We've talked before about trying to maybe look at releasing smaller contracts to attract more competition in order to move forward. So we're really looking at the approach in this way right now for the factors that I've mentioned, and I think it will be a great benefit to the program overall and also give us more control of costs and schedule and other aspects of the program. I won't spend a lot of time on this. You all know this, and the general manager spoke to it at some length, but you're familiar with the project. Again, it's important that this is our project and this is what we're proceeding with, so as not to bring forth any changes to it that could jeopardize the environmental process. We did have some innovations coming out of the work that we did with the current tunnel and track work contractor. And one of them that I think has met with very broad approval and is the idea of enlarging the tunnel a bit in order to be able to provide a side-by-side trackway and center platform, as opposed to the previous one that had the stacked station configuration. From an operations standpoint, that was really not the best approach. BART was not particularly happy with that. And also that for wayfinding and entering and exiting the station, the side-by-side figure and configuration center platform has great benefits. A few other things came out of this in terms of enlarging the tunnel, and we went from a 43-foot interior diameter tunnel to a 48-foot tunnel. One of the things that came out of it that has significant cost savings is elimination of what are called the mid-tunnel facilities. Those are some ventilation facilities, access facilities that were provided along the alignment over and above all of the other ventilation facilities that we have. And it also made a very positive change in the way that we can build the 28th and Little Portugal station, because by enlarging the diameter, we were able to go and build out the interior part of the station within the tunnel, rather than doing what we were going to do, which was do heavy top-down construction and open pit excavation in that area. That's also saved us a lot of money and also improved performance in terms of the operation of the system. And then I want to talk about station refinements. So the innovations and the station refinements and all fall within the realm of refinements in terms of the environmental process. We've been working very closely with the cities and BART and other stakeholders and looking at improvements that we can make in terms of the access to the downtown San Jose station with the reducing the number of switchbacks, and also at Deerdun Station in terms of some back-of-house facilities. So we've done a number of things there that I think you're familiar with on the station refinement side. So finally, I'll close this by saying this is our project configuration. So we have the single bore, we have the build out of the underground stations on 3 of them within the tunnel bore. And I think everybody remembers one of the primary choices of going with the single bore was to eliminate the disruption that would occur at the streets, similar to what we saw with the light rail program and the bus rapid transit programs. So we don't have to open up the centers of the street in order to build the stations as we do with a conventional twin bore process. And then also just wanted to point out on the right side of the graphic, just a clear understanding then of how we get access into the stations. So we have the above ground entry, we come down through the stations on escalators and stairways and elevators down to the level where we cross over into the tunnel. That crossover point there is referred to as an adit. So you'll be hearing that term coming up as we proceed through the presentation. So that's basically the configuration that we're working on. So let's get to the topic at hand that I know everybody's anxious to hear about. And that's schedule and cost assessment. So I want to walk through the timeline and going back to the 2020 estimate of $6.9 billion, and then go forward to 2021 where we had the $9.1 billion, and also in 2020 revenue service date 2030. And then in 2022, we carried forward the estimate to $9.3 billion, which involves some financing charge, and 2033 revenue service date. And now we'll be talking a lot about how we went from 2022 to 2023 in terms of the new costs and schedule estimates. So I'd like first to look at that early phase work that we did. So we started out in 2020, and we had a fairly low level of design, conceptual level design, and they were 2020 dollars. It was pre-pandemic, and we weren't seeing the effects of the inflation and other economic factors that we're experiencing now. And as shown in the upper left, it was that single bore tunnel with stacked platforms. We then carried that forward based on a risk assessment that was performed that took us to the 9.14, and then on to carry it forward to 2022, which went to the 9.3 billion. So I think really what happened between 2021 and 2022, because we didn't see much of a jump in the cost estimate there, was it was early and the full appreciation of what was going on in the economy had not been realized. So I think what's happened is that we really didn't maybe escalate those numbers between 2021 and 22 because we really didn't know what was happening in the economy. That was just when it was starting to heat up and causing some of the issues that we're seeing now. So to summarize that, we looked at the VTA risk assessment that was performed on the project, and they brought up a number of issues in terms of contingencies and other things that they thought we should consider. We looked at later procurement contract award dates as we reviewed the overall program, which affected the cost and schedule. And then we also found that we really needed to have extended systems testing periods. And then all of this generated longer construction durations. So those are the primary points that really took us from the revenue service date of 2030 to 2033 in terms of the schedule variance. In terms of the cost, the extended schedule obviously has a cost associated with it. The VTA had recommended that we increase the escalation up to 3.5 at that time, but as we've seen now, that was even way below what we were going to be experiencing going forward. We did higher costs, contract package costs were appearing as well, and we updated the design and estimates and looking at what we call trending at that time. And then anytime we increase the bare construction costs, we have a multiplier factor. So the construction costs themselves, we then have to apply contingency and escalation and soft costs components to that. And I'll get into that a little more detail later when we break that out. And then we did have that increase in the financing charges that took place in that period of time as well. So the way we present this data, and this is a lot of detail, but when we submit to the Federal Transit Administration, we use what they call standard cost categories. And you can see how they're broken down here into different components. The first 5 that are basically the construction elements of the project. In this case, SCC 10, guideway and track, stations, support facilities, site work, special conditions, systems. So that's the way the Federal Transit Administration asks us to break it out. They do that because they want to be able to compare projects one to the other. So that's why they set up the standardized process. And then the next line of cost items is the right-of-way land and existing improvements, vehicles, professional services. And then below that, we have the unallocated contingency and the finance charges. So you can see here very clearly what happened between the 2022 estimate as opposed to the 2020 estimate in terms of the cost. And I just really want to emphasize that the 2022 estimate really goes back to 2021 because of that escalation that I think we incorporated there was way below what the market was demonstrating. So you can see here where we have the variances in those various cost categories. And we see some areas like right-of-way, we're doing very well there. Vehicles, working closely with BART, came up with a solution there and haven't seen an increase, at least in this period of times. Professional services seen an increase. Unallocated contingency was increased. So we saw increases across quite a number of these line items that were generated by the reasons that I indicated. So with that, I'd like to go forward now to the discussion of going from 2021 to the 2023, the project cost and schedule estimate up to the 12.23. And I'll start out by discussing a little bit the factors that went into this assessment to go from the 9.3 to the 12.2. We discussed this, we've been discussing this for quite a long time in our various meetings, and we did have Mr. Rogoff present at the board a more detailed discussion of it. But I'd just like to point out that escalation has been one of the biggest factors that we're seeing in terms of impact on our projects, both in labor, material, and equipment. We are seeing increasing interest rates. Resource limitations continue to be a challenge. We talked a lot at the board meeting about workforce development. We must do things to remedy that so that we can find the resources to do the amount of work that we have there in terms of infrastructure especially. And then we're incurring supply chain challenges as well, as we're having trouble getting certain products onto and into the projects in a timely manner because of the interruptions to the supply chain, especially that happened during the pandemic. And then lack of competition. There's a lot of work out there. Mr. Rogoff spoke about that. So we experienced ourselves on the program when we went out for the contract package 1, 3, and 4. Limited interest and few responses to that approach. That's another reason we went back to design, bid, build. And then the current contracting environment is there's a lot of work, so contractors can pick and choose a little more than they have in the past and look for other approaches to the program, such as progressive design, build. And then the lingering effects of the pandemic. And that is, I think, affecting us as a nation in terms of productivity, but has a direct impact, quite frankly, on the project as we've been trying to bring resources into the project office, but the approach that came up during the pandemic of working remotely is something that we're challenged in terms of trying to have the resources we need in a project office for a project like this. I sort of summarize it that says that it's really going to be very difficult to deliver a mega project from home. This is a chart that we've shown you a couple of times, but just it really shows the picture of what happened between 2021 and 2022 in terms of escalation. And then interest rates as well. So, and then I just wanted to point out a couple of specific materials that we're seeing this escalation, and that is, for example, concrete. Installed cost of concrete has increased about 30% over the 2 years. And electrical, we're seeing similar phenomena as well. And then I just wanted to briefly, as we move into the schedule discussion, to give you somewhat of a background and understanding of how we go about developing our schedules. And it's quite a detailed process, as I've shown here in the flow chart. We basically break a project into what we call a work breakdown structure, where we identify activities that break the work down into a way that we can monitor and manage it more effectively. And then once we get those work breakdown structures in place, and there can be as many as 1,000 or more activities that we put into our schedules, then that's how we then see the sequencing of activities and how the construction will advance over the course of the project. So here's a simplified version of all of that, and wanted to show you how the various portions of the project fit together on a schedule like this. And so basically, the first one, CP2, is the current progressive design build contract that we have currently underway. So we're in the design phase of that project, and then we will go into procurement and construction. And we're getting close to starting on the construction of the West Portal facility. And then you can see how that relates to the other parts of the program. The underground stations, they are tied very closely to the tunnel and track work contract, because as I said, we had quite a lot of that work done under the other contract, and then the system contract, how it ties together, and then finally the yard and station facility. Just wanted to show you how that fits together, and when we look at scheduling, how we have to identify how these different components of the project will fit together. And just emphasizing that the red line on the chart is really the critical path. So going from that, I want to then talk about what has happened to extend the schedule. So we tried to lay it out as clearly as we could here. So I'd like to walk you through that. The first is contract package 2, the tunnel and track work contract. So you can see there that we had about a 2-month delay before we issued letters of notice to proceed. And then we took 5 months to do the innovations of studies to bring forth some of the improvements I've been reporting on the project. So that was about 7 months of the extension that we've seen. The next one has to do with the tunnel boring machine, ordering, delivery, and also the mining as well. So we have, there was some discussion of ordering the machine earlier this year, but we needed to take 11 months to complete what's known as tunnel space proofing. And that means that's the way that we confirm that the size of the tunnel is sufficient to accommodate the equipment and build out within it. We're also finalizing the TBM sizing based on the tunnel liner. And then the KST, the Kiewit trailer team, have negotiated with the tunnel supplier, the TBM supplier, so we are prepared to order that.
Recording stopped.
So,
Recording in progress.
and then we had we had a slower pace of tunneling than what was originally planned, driven in part by the larger diameter tunnel, but also in terms of the way those interfaces fit together on the other portions of the project that I showed earlier. So that resulted in 26 months of that extension. I would also point out on the TBM launch facility and temporary power, those are on critical path right now. So had we ordered the TBM back earlier in the year, we wouldn't have had the launch facility and temporary power ready for launch of the TBM. But it's now essential that we do get the TBM and we get the launch facility and temporary power in line and moving forward. And then we also had some extensions in looking at the system construction elements of the project. So that's basically what revolves to the extension of schedule from the 2033 to the 2036 date. The next thing I wanted to talk about is contingency. So for schedule, we have incorporated contingency based on experience and working with VTA and others and with the contractor. So for the tunnel boring machine fabrication and assembly, we have an indication that we may be able to have that happen within 20 months. But there is a risk in supply chain and other issues that we have to be concerned about. So we've added a four months to that for contingency, just so that we have sufficient contingency on the schedule to account for events forthcoming. And I mentioned the adits, the connection between the station and the tunnel itself. We originally were thinking that could be done in about 13 and a half months, those adits, but we feel that that's probably over-optimistic. We're looking at different approaches to the adit construction, whether it's ground freezing or grouting. So we're still working on that, so we've included 7 months of contingency there. And then we also have the BART project testing, commissioning, and the Operation Control Center testing that we have to do to start up the system once we get it built to the point we want. So that was another 12 months that we added onto there based on experience and actually in this case some recommendations from the VTA. So that amounts to 23 months of contingency that we have on the project. If we weren't to use that contingency, that would move the revenue service date back to 2034. But that's, we think it's prudent at this point in time to include that contingency given the uncertainties going forward. I'd like to next talk about the process we go through in terms of the cost estimates themselves. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just wanted to give you an appreciation that we take the design drawings, we do takeoffs from the design drawings. I have a set of drawings here if you'd like to look at them. And then we take takeoffs, we establish unit pricing for each of those items, especially material, labor, material, and equipment. And then we coordinate it with the schedule in terms of time phasing of those costs and will they be incurred. And that's how we come up with our cost estimates. I just wanted to quickly point out that we do cost estimating in accordance with American Association Cost Engineer Guidelines. And one of the things that we often do is that I think when we do estimates, we have to recognize that there's a range of accuracy that goes along with that. We have over the last couple of years gone from what we call a class 4, which is a definition of how much project definition you have. And you can see that for for that particular level of project definition, you can see ranges of lower of 30% or plus 50%. As we go to the area of better definition, you can see that it goes from minus 20 to 30. So as we advance the level of project definition, in particular the design, that's where you see how the costs will tighten up and the estimates will. I just want to just quickly also say that risk assessments play very heavily in this. So we sit down and go over on a regular basis what the primary risks are for the project, and we use what's known as a heat map. So red is a high-risk area, 9 is a medium, green, low. And so we look at things like unforeseen conditions in the tunneling that would have a possibility of high risk. And we try to monitor and manage that and mitigate it. And this plays into the way that we determine our contingencies in both our costs and schedule assessments. So the assumptions that went into the new baseline cost estimate, it is brought up to 2023 in terms of the base year. It includes the higher escalations that were incurred in 2022 and 2023 to bring it up to that point. It is year of expenditure, and I'll explain that a little bit. Year of expenditure means that we could estimate all those costs currently using current pricing. But given that the work is going to be done over the duration of the project, we want to make sure that we account for inflation and the costs of that work wherever it's going to occur over the duration of the project. So they are year of expenditure, meaning that that's what we anticipate at the end of the project to reach. And then we did have escalation projected out over the entire project period, ranging from 4.6 to 2.3. We're seeing a decrease in escalation going forward. We base this on our market saturation studies and the UCLA forecasts. And as I mentioned before, we have a far higher level of design now, gives us more confidence in the estimates. On contract package 2, we are working very closely on that one because we wanted to have an independent cost estimate because, as I've mentioned before, the progressive design build approach is a little bit different than design build. We don't have a firm fixed price up front on the contract. We're in the process of negotiating that with the contractor and won't come forward with that firm fixed price, what we call a guaranteed maximum price, until later next year. So that puts some uncertainty in terms of the cost estimates associated with this particular contract. And that's been challenging for us as we move forward because we've seen some increases in those costs over the course of our negotiations. We did include greater than 35% contingency, and as has been mentioned several times, this is all subject to the review, FTA risk assessment and review that will be taking part later this year. So these are subject to change as a result of that. So here's a summary, again, of the overall cost, the allocated contingencies and unallocated contingencies, and then the financing costs. We wanted to break that down further and compare it then from one baseline to the next. So we show here the comparison of the 2023 new baseline cost against that 2022 FTA budget request, going from 9.3 to 12.3. And this kind of gives you a higher order indication of what where the costs have changed in terms of the actual overall cost, and then the increases in contingency and the unallocated. Allocated contingency, then we usually put up in line items in the estimate itself. So this is broken down by standard cost category. So it again shows very clearly in what specific areas we're seeing the increases occurring, and allows us to track that and analyze it and manage it against it. Most of it has been in the construction 10 through 50, as we would expect, especially as a result of the inflationary impacts that we're seeing. And then we also have the right-of-way group has been doing an excellent job. We're actually seeing some reduction in the costs in right-of-way. And then the vehicles, we've held fast on that as well, working with BART. Professional services, as we continue to move forward, have increased. And we have added considerably more unallocated contingency just to prepare ourselves for future unforeseen events. So here's one of the things that you specifically asked us for, and that is where what is driving these increased costs? So we've went in and analyzed in detail that, and we've broken it out as follows, which is exactly the way we discussed it at the board meeting. We see that market conditions are driving the largest portion of the increase at 1.146 billion. That's driven heavily by the escalation that we've been talking about over the last 2 years that has caused all projects to see that type of increase. We have increased the contingency, so that's the next portion of the increase. And then there's the schedule. So I went through the schedule in detail and the delays associated with the schedule. So we've assessed that that has resulted in about $750 million increase. And then a term that we use called design advancement, which is really related to the innovations and the refinements, again, all within the confines of the environmental document. So we've seen an increase there as well. And that's probably driven in part by some of the additional work related to the larger tunnel. But a lot of that's been offset by the savings that we also got, as mentioned earlier, on the elimination of the mid-tunnel facilities and also on the improvements at 28th and Little Portugal. Just a few things then to wrap up. I just wanted to discuss again briefly looking forward as to some of the things that we're seeing. So we want to continue our value engineering estimates and proposals. And we're seeing some good savings there. And this is a sum of some of the things that we've done thus far. We have not incorporated that into the cost estimate, so that in some ways gives us added contingency. One of the things we're looking at that we've discussed a lot with the board in the past is a secondary head house at downtown San Jose Station. It's appearing more and more like we can eliminate that. So that's a really good news, I think, to the project, and also allows for down the road to come up with that southern entrance. So at this point in time, we don't need that. But there have been other, we're looking at a reconfiguration of Santa Clara Station, so we're going to be meeting about that. Seeing some really good ideas there in terms of access to the station and rider convenience.
Can I just touch base on that? One of the things with value engineering, oftentimes you have value engineering and it feels like we're taking away from the customer experience or elements of the project. I really congratulate the team and everything they've worked on, because these value engineering proposals are really about making the project better in ways that we can still save money. So I just want to make sure, I want to congratulate the team for really taking a look at these and bringing in other people to actually be able to discuss all these different proposals.
And then we're also working very closely, especially with Kiewit Shea Trailer right now on constructability. This shows a schematic of the West Portal launch facility where we'll be launching the TBM in the new Hall Yard area. We've seen some cost growth in that and looking at different construction approaches that maybe we can affect a better solution there, a more cost-effective solution. And then also another area that's really interesting and challenging is doing the interior build-out within the tunnel while we're still mining. And so we're working very closely with KST to address those logistics and find hopefully more cost-effective ways to undertake that, because we are seeing some cost growth in that as we move forward. So I'd like to just quickly talk about a few of the cost control measures that we want to continue to implicate and even do better at, and that is, I mentioned the independent cost estimates, which give us a good check. We're negotiating on the contract package 2 using the independent cost estimate we had done. That is underway. We're seeing some cost growth in that particular contract, so we want to address that and make sure that we're going to end up at a guaranteed maximum price that will meet the needs of the project and keep us to budget. One item is that now that we've designed the design to this point, we're in the position to do what we call design to budget, so that as the design advances, we can continue to monitor the cost implications of any of that design and make sure that we design it and accommodate for the cost budget that we've set. Soft costs continue to always need close looking in terms of the overall management costs associated with delivering these projects. And then we are looking at contracting and bidding options, even within contract package 2, as I've discussed. We have options there to where We don't necessarily have to do all that work under a self-perform approach. We can have the Kiewit Shea trailer team bid that work out to get more competition and pricing. And then we've discussed also risk sharing, because right now, the way the marketplace is, contractors are tending to come in and taking almost zero risk approaches in the way they approach construction and the way they approach their estimates. And the way we can help mitigate that is to come up with ways that we can set up allowances and undertake risk sharing with the contractors so that they don't carry the full burden of that and the uncertainty of it. And then finally, just wanted to quickly mention a few of the upcoming activities. So I mentioned the TBM procurement. The West Portal early work packages are ready to start work with here fairly soon. We did release the RFP for the construction management services. We had a pre-proposal meeting last week, a great turnout. We had 60 people in the auditorium and another 60 virtually. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that contract, and we'll be bringing a construction management services firm on to help. And then also we'll be releasing a project management consultant services contract here before the RFP, I should say, before the end of the year. And then we have, as I showed on that earlier schedule, we have those other big contracts coming up to do the systems, to do the stations, to the yard and maintenance facility. So there's a lot more work coming up that we'll be completing the design on and starting to move forward with contracts on that. So with that, I'll end my presentation and thank you again for the opportunity to work on the project and invite any questions and discussion that you'd like to have.
Thank you. Thank you. So before going into our questions, I just wanted to add a couple of other clarifications. First, in my opening comments, I had omitted that Director Mahan is a member of the Ad Hoc Committee on Oversight. His role is very important as Mayor of San Jose, as MTC director, and through the relationships that the mayor has with Sacramento and in DC. Second, when we go through these sets of questions, both at this time and then after Greg Richardson speaks, another set of questions and comments, we're really, as the ad hoc committee, we're really looking for the board today to feed us any questions, comments, concerns, directions that you want to have the ad hoc committee pursue. This is really the opportunity for you as board members to make sure that we are pursuing the areas that you're most concerned with. And then lastly, after Greg Richardson speaks, I'm going to ask Scott Johnson, our Auditor General, to say a few brief words about what he has been requested to do. Many of you may recall that we already had authorized the Auditor General to take on an additional role in reviewing the BART Phase 2 project. More recently, we've had discussions with him about an even more expanded role in really providing independent input to the committee and to the board, looking at the project from non-staff eyes, and to really support the role of the board in scrutinizing this project. And we've authorized him to expand his staffing in this area to bring in domain experts. And so he'll be speaking briefly to that after the questions of Greg. So I just wanted to clarify those different things. So on that note, who would like to kick off questions or comments? Director Jane.
And Omar.
Thank you, Gary, for the presentation. I look at the cost escalation ranges, and they're vast. It's 2.3% up to 4.6%. And I know maybe Greg will cover that later with the prices. But, I'd like to understand a little bit better the delays. The delays concern me I mean, everything concerns me, but the delays concern me more than the cost escalations, because I think I can understand those a little bit better. Now, I know for supply chain, you know, I serve on the council in Santa Clara, and we have Silicon Valley Power, and we know that transformers that used to take 6 months are now 3-4 years out. So, you know, there's still supply chain issues that could throw everything, you know, off in terms of estimates. So I want to understand what we're doing to sort of mitigate the risk of, you know, having long lead times for certain parts. Then the other thing is that it was a surprise to me that the expanding the size of the tunnel boring machine was going to slow down the dig rate, which is now impacting. I think we should have been informed of that right away. That's kind of a surprise to me. And then I'd like to understand a little bit better the temporary power issue. If that's at Santa Clara, maybe, you know, Santa Clara Silicon Valley Power can help with that. And then finally, and probably Greg will cover this, is I'd like to understand more about risk sharing, you know, due to the escalations. Do any of these contracts ever go like cost plus? I know PG&E has cost plus, but that's a mess. And so, but, you know, can we, to mitigate the risk of not knowing how much escalation is going to be, it seems like the people that are bid, they're going to incorporate the highest escalation so they never lose money, but then they could have massive profits. So I'd like to understand how we can, whether there's a cost plus type arrangement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Jane. I'll go through those. So the cost escalation, I did present that, which is based on our market saturation studies and also UCLA forecasting. So we're really basing it on as good information as we can get at this point in time. And we've also made adjustments, as I mentioned, to the previous escalation rates that we did not fully expect to bring the numbers up to the 2023 level. Supply chain, one of the biggest items we have is the tunnel boring machine, but the contractor has been working very closely. We have a supplier identified. There is no indication there that there's going to be a problem getting that over here. In terms of the contingency that I've shown, we think we can get it over here in 20 months. We put a 4-month contingency in there just in case, but I don't think we've necessarily seen an issue there. There is an issue though, and we have to have a U.S. flag carrier to bring it across, and so that's one of the things that we might see. But I haven't heard from the contractor yet that we see that as an issue. In other supply chain issues, I don't know that we're seeing. I know. In one area, maybe it's not so much supply chain, it's more the volume of work out there right now. So we are concerned, for example, about can we get the amount of steel or rebar in this case for the build out of the tunnel liner. So there is a lot of competition for a limited amount of material. So that's a supply issue as well. I don't know that it's so much about getting product to the project site as it is just what we're seeing in the marketplace. The tunneling rate, the contractor actually thinks that they can advance the tunneling at the same rate that they had originally proposed for the smaller tunnel. We've just put some contingency in there, as I showed, in case that is not possible. And we had previous feedback from the VTA in the previous risk assessment where they questioned our tunneling rate. So we thought it would be, but we're hoping that we can achieve a better tunneling rate than what we've allowed for here with the contingency. But I think it's wise to have that contingency in there. But over and above the tunneling rate is that the schedule I laid out showing how the different components of the project fit together. So where the tunneling ties into the underground station work and others, that's a critical interface on the critical path. So there's been some impact of that with the current scheduling that we have for the TBM procurement and mobilization. In terms of temporary power, what we have to do is we have to step down from 115 kV to 34.5 in order to provide temporary power to the tunnel boring machine. That is a supply chain issue, and it's a Buy America issue too. We need a step-down transformer. It needs to be Buy America. So we've been searching for that, and that right now is on the critical path. But I think I have some good news about that if my BART colleague Shane will nod his head, that I believe that they may have one spare that we can use until, if for any reason we're delayed in getting our new step-down transformer here, we could use that in the interim and then get something back to BART in a timely way so that we don't put them at jeopardy. And then risk sharing, a very important issue, because as I mentioned, and we've talked about this before with the board, that we're seeing that contractors they're not as willing to take on risk as they have in the past. And it's really because of the marketplace. There's just a lot of work out there and Mr. Rogoff addressed this as well in terms of there are a lot of opportunities out there. Look for the one with the lowest risk. This is a high-risk project. I mean, anytime you start digging through the bowels of the earth, you're going to have surprises. And so that's why we're doing the risk register in the way that we are. But what the approach there is to not put all of that burden, not to put all of that risk, and not have the contractor carry all of that contingency. And so what a lot of owners are doing are sharing that, so that we'll say, okay, we share this risk. If it's used, then we use what we have to of it. If there's something left over, we might even look at sharing what's left over as an incentive. And so for both risk and contingency. And then in terms of doing basically time and materials that you mentioned, we are looking at that for some of the smaller portions of the project, because then time and material, we don't have to try to estimate and plug in heavy contingencies and other things that are basically going to pay whatever it's going to cost at the time that we do the work. So we're looking at all of those approaches.
I'm sorry, can I just respond to one of those? One of the questions was about the escalation, and in my section of the presentation, we don't get into much of the details on the escalation itself, mainly because it's been talked about really so much. But the thing I just want to reference is in that range of escalations, what you're finding is really in the first, I'd call it 2 to 5 years, is where there's a little bit more predictability of what's going on, and so you're seeing a little bit higher rates of escalation. And then as you get into the out years, it becomes more of that linear sort of estimate, which is more in that 2 to 2.5% range, and it stays pretty consistent for those last 10, 15 years of the process.
At least those are our assumptions. Yeah. Director Torres.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's the glass is half full, so we got to continue to pour water in it. I do have a couple of questions. So as a first-time voter back in the year 2000, I was so eager to vote for Measure A back in the day. And as a matter of fact, there's some board members on this committee who actually were probably babies in 2000. So, and here we are, though, Omar and Sergio. Are we thinking of as costs continue to rise? Are we thinking of another measure, or no, or not? Have we thought about it?
Have we thought? I would say it's always going to be something that's being thought about, and you'll see in my section of the presentation, because with Measure A, it does sunset in 2036. And so as a result, from an operating perspective, it provides funding that's necessary from an operations perspective. Mm-hmm. And so it definitely becomes a critical item for us as we move forward beyond 2036. But on top of that, there might be opportunities for capital-type items, and again, some other revenue source has to be identified at some point in time to ensure that that can continue.
Okay. Great.
But
Oh.
let's be clear, we're not looking at another sales tax measure for the
right.
BART project.
Okay.
Put it that way. I think we're more concerned about, as measures sunset, and we have particularly operating funds, that are coming from those measures. Those are ones where we're gonna wanna look at, which is the 2036.
Right,
So I
no,
wanna make
and-
it clear that
Yeah.
it's not the BART.
And I commend that that you and other folks that are not in this room who are big supporters of BART, and so we have different funding sources, right? So it's, thank you to Supervisor Chavez and Mayor Mayhem for being on, is it MTC? Yeah, MTC, so,
Member Torres, if I can just, and part of that sourcing could be internal. And so this is what by 2036, we're talking about whether it's managed lanes, express lanes, TOD development, all of those different items. These resources may be completely internal and not necessarily having to go out. So that's where I'm just saying, it has to be evaluated. Sources have to be identified, but that's definitely something that'll be done.
okay. And in the other one, I'm actually more of a visual person. In slide 26 and 42, what category is the bore in? Would that be under guideway and track elements?
Yes,
Yes.
I can answer that one before you show it.
Okay. Good. And then when was the bore? I know I've only been here for a couple months, but the bore was finalized a couple years ago, I'm assuming?
You mean going to the single bore?
Yes.
Yes,
the single bore.
quite a long time ago. It was in 2018, actually, was when the record decision, and that decision was made by both the BART and the VTA board.
Okay.
And can you just add to it the date at which the larger single bore decision was made?
Yeah, the larger single bore came forward in the innovations that were brought forward in early 2022, after the award of the contract to KST in May of 2022. So it was mid-2022 that we were evaluating that and carrying it forward.
And how much was the estimate then? I think it's in the presentation, but I know that there's just a whole lot of numbers in this presentation, so it was a lot to take in. How much was the bore?
At that time, I don't have the breakdown on the bore itself. At that time, the overall program cost was 9.3. We looked at those innovations. There were a number of innovations that we considered. I think there were like 11 of them. We anticipated that we would have savings of about $350 million from those innovations. So the big savings really came from the elimination of the mid-tunnel facilities, those access points that we had before, and also on the improvements and the simplification of the construction of 28th and Little Portugal.
Okay, great, thank you. And then in slide 48, it says project management consulting services. How many outside consultants are we planning on having? Do we have?
That's on there.
Yeah, Director Torres, I'm not sure which slide it was, 28?
48?
Oh, 48, I'm sorry.
Can't be 48.
Can't be 40.
Slide
46, I think it's
Yeah,
46.
it's the project management oversight consultant.
where all the folks are standing right in front of the massive board that's.
Yeah, okay.
an incredible picture,
Yeah,
by the way.
I would like to speak to
Right there.
that, yes. So the
Yeah,
construction.
48, see, it is 48.
Construction management services, we have structured that in a way to try to maximize opportunities for firms to come into the program. So the procurement we're currently underway is to select a CM entity team that will be looking at the tunnel and track work contract, CP2. As we move forward with the other contracts, and we have some time before we'll start construction on systems and stations and other contracts, we will then go out for additional procurements for those teams to do systems and stations and up to 2 or maybe more other teams. One thing is that we have tied the teams together, though. The team that we're selecting right now, we want them to be the lead entity, but we will then, down the road, be selecting those other teams that will then tie in and organizationally will tie into the current team that we're looking to select. And in particular, we wanted to open up opportunities for small and disadvantaged business.
Absolutely.
That was a real goal that we had in structuring it that way.
Okay.
So the construction management services is out right now, and that's the piece that Gary's talking about, where we will have the, we will put other, I guess, work out on the street to break it up a little bit more, but they'll manage the overall construction management.
Okay.
Then the project management consultant services, we currently have HNTB WSP joint venture to run sort of the overall program control. They're the consultant staff in-house who really are supporting us. They were brought in 7 years ago, roughly, and we are continuing to work with them in terms of the design phase. It was always assumed we would go back out when we start construction, because the team that you wanted during the innovation phase, during the design development, during all that, those leads and those heads can be very different than who's going to be very engaged in the construction aspects of it and helping support the team, the program office and managing this. So that goes back out. Doesn't mean that HNTB WSP won't win it, but I'm just saying it will be out for competitive selection.
Great. And I know I'll have a conversation with somebody on VTA offline, but I recently went to a workshop that VTA hosted in my district, and a contractor or a small business did actually approach me and say that they've applied for many of the contracts that we have for BART, and she was denied. And so it's a woman-led business, and so, you know, I'm glad that Gary is saying that we are making sure that it's folks who of our color or women who own these businesses. And so I can talk a little bit offline, because she was just bringing up so much stuff that nothing was in front of me, so I'm more of a visual person.
Yeah, we have an RFP out right now for support for our DBE office to assist them in a whole number of areas. But the area that we really, really do have to work on is actually helping support firms to be matched with primes if they can't be a prime, they're just not large enough or can't get the bonding or whatever, and then also be able to support them in being able to develop and grow and get registered or get those skill sets. And those are things that we really need to work on and really look towards what other agencies are doing, because this is such a big program and so massive an opportunity for us to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I still feel like we're not there yet
Great.
at all. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
No, thank you. And so I know that this project is crucial for not only downtown San Jose, but our region. So, I think many of us are worried that the costs continue to rise, but we all know the factors that are playing into it, right? Because BART to San Jose needs to happen, and it's important that it needs to happen. But again, I do want to, before I yield back my time, the external forces of BART to San Jose, right? I still, unfortunately, go to sleep thinking of the small businesses that closed down on Allen Rock Avenue after BRT, and so we got to make sure that we are doing this the right way, because I don't want to lose sleep. Especially now more than ever that I represent downtown San Jose and a lot of downtown San Jose businesses, and the ecosystem is going to be impacted. So, thank you.
And I'll just note that yesterday at the A&F committee, we had a detailed report on our progress and our program for supporting disadvantaged and small businesses. And so that staff report, you may want to get additional briefing on that. And as Carolyn said, going forward, it's a big part of the initiative. So Director Davis.
Thank you. I first of all, I want to thank you for the detailed presentation. When we see the number go up by as much as it did, I know I had sticker shock when we did our briefing, and I really appreciate the the detail in where all the additional dollars are being allocated. I did want to ask one question on this schedule, and then I have a couple of dollar questions. For the schedule contingency, what do you have on schedule contingency for the tunnel boring, the mining itself? I didn't see that anywhere. So you had the machine fabrication and assembly, but not the mining? And so I don't know what the schedule contingency is for that. And did that change given that the size of the machine changed?
Yeah, we have, I believe, I'd have to maybe get the exact numbers, Director Davis, but I believe that the contractor is anticipating that they will be able to advance at 38 feet per day. And we have built in a contingency based on, I believe it was 31 feet per day. And that was somewhat informed by the previous FTA assessment that was done. So that, as a built-in contingency, we're anticipating it will take about 40 months to do the tunneling. So that is built into the schedule.
Okay, thanks. I just, the big dig in Boston always comes to mind when we talk about the tunnel boring machine, and that's why I have a little heartburn about it. Although, because I supported the tunnel boring machine because of the businesses that would have been disrupted by the cut and cover. So I'm all in on the fact that we're doing it. I just want to make sure that we've got enough built in there to know if the machine breaks down. It's not like, anything can happen if one part doesn't work. So thank you for that. In terms of the contingency, the allocated contingency and the unallocated contingency, can you talk a little bit about those two buckets for the benefit of the public? I know I've already asked this question in our briefing. You can just go to 41 if you want.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Director Davis. So the allocated contingency is, we generally allocate that over actual construction line items. And right now it's at about 20%, which is consistent with what we're seeing in the industry. The unallocated contingency is very much informed by the risk assessment that we do. So in looking at the risk assessment, we try to see where we could have major impacts in that heat map I showed briefly on the risk assessments and assessments of what those impacts will be. So that's informed by that. In aggregate, we've raised it to a little over 35%. The previous estimate had 30%. And the FTA had raised some concerns about that too. So some of this we're kind of anticipating what we think we'll be hearing from the FTA. I would also say that the FTA, we've worked very closely with them at our monthly risk assessment workshops. So we've had FTA involved in those workshops to help determine going forward.
Thank you. So to sum up, the allocated contingency goes into specific buckets, and you add it up and put it in the allocated contingency. The unallocated contingency is sort of a things we don't know we need yet.
Yes, Director Davis, you explained it better than I did.
Okay, I just wanted to sum it up. I think it's helpful for the public to know why we do that. And then my last question is actually about that. When we are going to, by the way, I very much support the design bid build. And when we are bidding and going into contracting, how are we contracting so that our contractors don't see those contingencies, because obviously everything is public here, don't see those contingencies as a slush fund for them?
Yes, that's always a concern. And I guess in terms of the letting people know what the contingencies are, on a program-wide basis, we have to do that because we present them to the FTA, so they are public. We are very careful, and you'll see that I did not show comparisons of the different contract packages today for that exact reason. We didn't want to have the contracting community out there looking at what we're anticipating, both of the costs of those other contracts as well as the contingency we have included in them.
And are you contracting in such a way that you talked a little bit about sharing risk, but does that go all the way to contingency where there's a shared contingency of whatever's left at the end? There's a split of some sort, doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50.
Yeah.
So that they have a cost and a schedule incentive to come under?
Yes, very much so. And we want to use allowances in terms of having a set aside, and we already have that in our contract with KST. But in terms of risk sharing and contingency sharing, we're working on developing those so that, again, they don't have to put in the full amount of contingency that they may want to based on taking maybe more of a zero risk approach. And then the other thing that I think we don't do enough of, and we've talked about with the KST team, is putting in incentives to say that, you know, if you are able to advance the tunneling faster than what we've programmed, then, you know, incentivize that, and that will help. We tend to have penalties plugged in all these contracts, but we don't have enough incentives. And we've been trying to do that with our consultants, where it's a, you know, it's a performance-based fee. It's just not a percentage on top of cost. So we always want to look for those opportunities.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And when you come back to the board with each of these contracts, it would be really helpful if you highlight where those incentives are and what they are, and talking about shared risk or shared contingency would be very helpful on a go-forward basis. I think I know that would help me. I don't know about anybody else, but it would help me be a little bit more comfortable, especially with the size of some of these contracts.
Yes, I understand, Director Davis, and we're currently having those discussions with the contractor, so I don't have firm fix of numbers to give you, but we'll be working those up.
So we did use incentives both for consultant services on phase one, and we used it for the main contract as well, the construction contract. We did pay incentives on the consultant service. We did not pay the incentives on the other on the construction contract. But I will say that it is something that we're continuing to look at. The other thing is, and I think, Gary, we're going to go out, continue to outreach to the contractor industry, first of all, to try to make sure that we get as many bids as possible. Competitive environment's key. Second would be actually understanding from them where they are putting the risk, and they're more than willing, I think, to help share in the risk pool, and to make sure that happens. So it's really doing a lot of outreach to the community, but we will come back with anything that we actually do put into those contracts. But we do have the option right now to do it, you know, look at what the existing contract is, and then for the future contracts, which are design, bid, build.
Great, thank you. And then the only thing I would add to that is, of course, when we put in these incentives, we have to make sure we've got quality control on our side. So I know it's a cost benefit for us because we have that quality control, additional costs that we have on our side for that, to make sure that they're meeting their incentives but still doing quality work. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, I have Director Blankley, followed by Directors Lee, Jimenez, and Foley.
Thank you. I fully support transportation, trying to be, I'm here taking my time, unlike some people who are here on a paid salary. I'm here as the mayor of Gilroy, who we don't get separately paid for these things. So this is very important to me, and that's why I serve on this board. And my main hope from this workshop was to get a better understanding of $12.237 billion, because all of us here should be able to explain to our constituents why that cost is so large for 6 miles. I'm very disappointed in the presentation we've had so far, and I can say that because I've had 2 private one-on-ones with staff, plus the board meeting. So I think it's okay that my expectations were a little higher coming here. And I am trying to get at what is driving that $12.2 billion much more specifically. So I think what I'd like to do is speak more to the ad hoc committee and ask that the ad hoc committee address the following, as opposed to trying to get answers here that I just don't think are going to be coming. And that is to look at, to start with slide 26, which takes this original $6.941 billion, have a schedule that goes from 2020 to today, not just 2020 to 2022, and then show it separately on slide 42, because that doesn't help. You have to add the two together to understand how we got from the original 6.9 billion. These are not thousands, these are not millions, these are billions. And we're here, we're supposed to be here as policy directors, not as people who are being lobbied or told, don't go back, this is what you need to do. And that's kind of what I heard in the presentation, and would prefer that we instead have a position of deciding for ourselves how we're going to spend taxpayer money when it's this much. So I would ask the ad hoc committee to go from slide 26, combine it with slide 42 so we see the progression, and then on slide 43, when you're detailing the market drivers, those numbers should be added in based on the same line items that are on 26 and 42, so that we can understand of the construction cost increase, which is 2 billion plus 907 billion. So the construction cost alone is 3 billion, right? No, 3, am I doing that right? 907 million and 3 billion is in just construction alone. How much of that 3 billion is market conditions? Because otherwise, when we ask ourselves, where are the pieces so that we can all make decisions and not just be told what to do, we need to know that that design advancement of 342 billion does not include market, all these other things. If you were to pull one thing out, like when you do your own budget, you have to know all the pieces that are removed if you omit doing that one thing. And this doesn't tell us that. It's not telling us that at all. And it certainly isn't addressing professional services. You know, why did professional services in the first 2 years go up 851 million, and then another 552 million 2 years later? Nothing to do with construction. So I'm sorry if I sound upset, but it's because this is the 4th time now that I'm addressing this, where I've asked to get more information, and I feel like all I'm getting is not what I'm asking for, and to pretty much say, don't worry about it, we got this. And I don't appreciate that. So that's what I want to ask of the ad hoc committee. If you could please come back with something that gets at what I think some of us, and certainly myself, has been asking for, but it's not being addressed properly. It's being glossed over, and I can't explain this to my constituents, and if I can't understand it to explain it to them, then I can't support it. And that hurts me, because I am really supportive of transportation, and I want this completed.
Carolyn?
I appreciate that, and I apologize you don't have the information that you wanted. I will say, going from the 6.9 to the 9.1 is actually very clearly documented in the PMOC risk assessment. So we should have presented that information, because that tells you how what their analysis was to get us to the 9.1. And then I know the 9.1, 9.3 was $200 million more financing costs we added on, because the interest rates at that time were going up. So we will get that information so that you have it cumulatively what happened over time. They are different reasons, as we already mentioned, between the 6.9 and the reason why it went to 9.3 versus 9.3 to 12. But we could get that, and I do think, and I will say the AG already has those PMOC reports. They have the risk registers. They'll be able to go clearly through that as well. So I apologize you don't have that information today.
And I'll just add that, as I mentioned before, and we're going to have the Auditor General speak briefly at the end, the role of the Auditor General in this committee work is really crucial. And that's how the board members are going to have the independent technical support to really dive into not only these major categories, but subcategories, and address those various questions. I agree fully. Okay, Director Lee.
Thank you. Actually, I just want to piggyback on what Mayor Blankley says. I think it'll be helpful to be able to drill down a bit more. Like, for example, we look at the dollar amount that went up significantly. Of course, the most expensive is the guide-wheel track, for example, right? So is it the steel cost? Is it the concrete? Is it labor? If there's some breakdown on that, I think that could be helpful to understand where those changes are from the 2020 estimate to where we are now. So that was the question. Now, maybe this is a dumb question, Gary. First of all, I just want to say thank you for all your great work for decades, working on these issues for so many countries in the world. I'm very glad to hear that you've actually worked on the issue in Seoul, for example, or in China, because you definitely see the difference. I used to joke about saying, you want to slow down China, give them CEQA. Okay. So I mean, the question always is, having lived in Hong Kong for my first 15 years of my life, how well the subway works there, and they're still expanding as we speak, right? And there are way more people on the surface and businesses than we do. I certainly want to ask for your insight on this, Gary, in general, and that is, you said the one in Seoul took 5 years to build, right? I'm looking at our revenue date being 36. So I'll be about almost 70 years old by then. So which means I'll be Social Security and continue past this. But but more all seriousness, I mean, we're talking about at least 13 years from today for these 6 miles. So if you could enlighten us, I mean, we all say it's environmental and CEQA, all that. Can you enlighten me a little bit more as to what really is the delta of times? And is there any way somewhere through learning from the countries in Asia how they build things? We're a democracy. We're not China, right? That's why they can make things so much faster. But even Seoul, which is a democracy, is there any lessons learned from some of those projects you worked on that there's any way we could see potentially shrinking? I understand try to get a longer date, that we shortened it. We also have some lessons learned, right, from the Beresa extension. We had 2 years just for computer issues. The darn thing's built, right? They're running, but for 2 years, they're computer issues that we're working off of, and lawsuits and whatnot. But in any case, so any of these lessons learned we can to try to shorten the time, because at the end of the day, to me, in terms of cost, we keep arguing about, it is the time, right? $30 million a month is $1 million a day of delay, right? So that's really, time is my number one concern right now. How can we move this closer so that we could get this moving? Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Director Lee, I have had the good fortune of working on projects also around the world. I think there are a number of differences. We are far more risk averse than other countries are, and we are far more litigious in the way that we conduct our business. And that's, I think, one of the things that tends to hold us back in the way we progress our projects here. Now, I wouldn't recommend going to some of the extremes that I've seen in other countries where, I mean, when we did the Seoul project, it was basically President Chun got up one day and said, start digging up the streets, So, I mean, it was they shortcut all of the processes that we use here. But I think we have some of the best construction practices here than anywhere else in the world. And so why we can't do a better job with that talent, I really think is kind of driven by the opposition. There's a lot more recognition of the rights of our citizens especially in terms of things like eminent domain, where you won't see in other countries. So that can hold projects up a lot. Individuals can challenge our projects and hold them up in the courts, and we see that all the time. So I think it really ties back a lot to that. In some ways, our democracy gets in our way, maybe more than it needs to, and we need to try to break through that. And then I think the environmental process is, we have a very thorough and well thought out process, and I wouldn't advocate, compromising that to a great extent, but it's a very complicated process. And we tend to have to deal with all different agencies in order to progress our work. And so here in California, of course, we have to meet CEQA, and then we have to meet federal NEPA. So we have that that is obviously adding a lot of time to our projects. And I wouldn't, again, recommend compromising it much, but I think we can streamline it. And there have been efforts in previous administrations to streamline delivery, both at the state level and also at the federal level. And there's some good ideas about what we could do there. But I think it's the rights of our citizens to take issue on an individual basis and hold up our projects. And I think it's somewhat the litigious nature of the way that we conduct business in this country, because we just see an awful lot of items coming up in the courts that we would hope we could avoid. We continue to look for ways of having alternative dispute resolution approaches where we use mediation and arbitration and other things to avoid going to litigation. But there's far too much of that in this country that we need to try to find a solution to.
So Gary, yeah, I mean, we all know about the litigious nature of the United States, which is famous around the world. My question, when you talk about streamlining, is instead of a lot of these things we are doing in serially, in terms of streamlining, you're trying to do some of these things in parallel, right?
Yeah.
Do you see there's potentially even more ways that you could propose to the board, like 2036 being the latest instead of the earliest, and see if you could say, okay, we could streamline this part, we could shorten by 3 months, we shorten this part, we can do it by 6 months. Is there something that you could propose back to us so that we have some options to make or something that we could look at?
Yeah, Director Lee, I think that's a good idea. And I'm probably already in trouble with my environmental planners, but I think we could look at all aspects of the project and come back with recommendations of maybe ways that we could accelerate the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
And I will say, we did have, and for good or bad, I mean, it was sort of somewhat confusing for the board first phase, but we had the contingency schedule, and then we had a schedule we drove to. And that's really what we need to do. We need to have a schedule we're going to drive to, not assuming we're going to have 23 months of contingency added onto there. So that's what we really need to do, and that's the thing I think Gary and the team can come back with, is what is the schedule that we're driving to, and how are we mitigating those risks so that we aren't going to hit those contingencies or whatever. I think for us, the contingency is that outlier that we make the agreement with the federal government, because they want to know when you're going to finish. So we always put a lot of contingency in, you'll finish by this date. But I think we need a schedule to drive to.
Right, and like last time, we did take a vote on this. Turned out the planning work was ahead of schedule, for example, right? Well, it was so great that we were able to say, hey, we could allocate more money to move forward because that was faster than we thought. And I think we want to make sure we have that built in so that, oh, well, that was faster than we thought, and so, but the other part wasn't ready, and we're gonna have to wait till that. So I just wanna make sure that the other parts following, we'll be able to be more flexible in the future, so that if things are really moving faster, let's take advantage of that. And I'm just so concerned that we're so set on the schedule. Sometimes, even though we move fast in certain ways, the latter part is not able to catch up to move it forward. So I just want to mention that as a, so if there's any way you can come back to us on this streamlining and some of these potential shortening of our schedule, I think would be huge, because let's say we shorten this by a year, right? 30 million times 12, that's how much we just saved, potentially. So, yeah, so that's my piece. Thank you.
And I would concur that, and we raised this issue recently on, we have a range on the timeline, as we were discussing, and I really do think that we need a contingency planning if we're able to move on a given major step toward the front end of the range to make sure that we are teed up to be able to accelerate the next steps. Thank you.
And Chair, can you also add to that, to what Director Lee is saying? What with CEQA or litigiousness society, what changed since 2020? Because we're talking about this huge increase in cost from the 6.9 billion to the 12.2. So what is it about CEQA and litigation that has changed that cost? What do we know today that we didn't know in 2020? What's different? If that could also be something that the ad hoc committee looks at, because I'm not understanding how this discussion is contributing to the 12.2 billion unless I know what it is that we've decided is a problem that we didn't think was a problem in 2020.
Okay, thank you. Director Foley and then Director Lopez. No, yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation and the questions of all of my colleagues. I had a lot of questions and most of them are answered by right now, but Director Lee talked about streamlining, and Gary, you've mentioned streamlining, but can you give me an idea of what's streamlining other than modifying CEQA and that, because that's not going to happen. So what other areas, well, we've tried and it's a pipe dream at this point, but so what other areas are you looking at for streamlining the project?
So what's been looked at in the past is to try to have as much as possible one point of contact at the federal level that would handle all of the issues that we're dealing with, not having to go to the, and it's the state level as well, not having to go to all the different resource agencies, Fish and Wildlife or wetlands and all the other areas that you have to go to see if there's some way that, and that's been seriously considered in the past. It hasn't gained much traction, but I think that would help a lot, because now we have to cover a lot of bases whenever we undertake these environmental documents. So, and even I think looking at, developing a construction authority that is just dedicated to project delivery to advance these projects, rather than having it, having so many different entities involved in the decision-making that slows the process. So I think the biggest part of streamlining is try to reduce the number of points of contact that you have to deal with to get approvals to move forward with the project. That's what's been discussed in the past.
More like a small business would be able to streamline and make the decision at the ground floor much quicker. So you're talking about bureaucracy. That doesn't sound, that's as easy to change as the CEQA reform. So, so I'm going to move on. I really appreciate Director Blankley's approach. I would too like to see the ad hoc committee look at the side-by-side comparison of all of these numbers, because I've done the math on my HP 12C, and if you look at professional services, it's gone up 60% in 2022 and then another 23% in 2023. So I would like to know more specifically what's in those professional services. I'd also like to know what's in the soft costs, what's the number, what's there, where can we cut the budget and still maintain the project, still maintain the safety and environmental issues that we're concerned about, but cut back on, we need to tighten our belt a little bit, and I don't know where, and I'm hoping the ad hoc committee will know where once they take a look more in depth at these numbers. You've referred to a term, and I'm fairly new on this board, and I've had a couple of briefings, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I don't know what it really means. So I apologize to my colleagues if you all know what this means and I don't. You've referred to progressive design build is what we currently have with QXJ. Can you tell me, and you've mentioned that there's no final contract. Am I clear on that? Do we not have a final number from them? And if not, why not? And this seems like a big risk to me that we have this open process with them. So can you detail that a little bit more?
Yes, Director Foley. So design build is basically combining the design and construction under one entity. And it's felt that there will be schedule savings doing that, because you can overlap the design and construction more than you would do if you took it to full design on our own. So one of the very, excuse me. So one of the variations on that is to use the progressive design build approach. And basically what that means is that the contractor comes in and they give us what's known as an indicative price, an indication of what the cost of the project is going to be. It's not binding. So it's just it's indicative that we can look at as we proceed through the progressive phase. There's a great benefit to the progressive phase in that we can work together with the contract to effect a better project and hopefully to negotiate a cost that we can come to terms on. The uncertainty is that cost will not be determined until we advance the engineering beyond the 85%, which is going to occur later next year. So we have a period of time there where what we do is at the various submittal stages, the 30% design submittal stage, then we look at and work with the contractor to look at the cost estimate that they come up with on that, at that level of design. We do an independent cost estimate, and then we sit down and we negotiate that. And then when we get to the next level of design, we'll do the same thing going forward. What we're seeing, and it's probably driven by the economy again in part, is that we're seeing, as we negotiate through the current contract, that we're seeing some significant increases. So we're trying to address those. But right now, and let me answer the other part of your question, we do have a contract. So the contractor is under contract for the project. It's just that we don't have what's known as a guaranteed maximum price. If it were a traditional design build, we would have that price up front.
Okay.
So there are a lot of benefits to it in the way we can work together with the contractor team and to the benefit of the project, but the cost uncertainty is, in this current environment especially, is challenging.
So I'd like to drill down a little bit on that. I hear what you're saying, but, and we have a contract, but we don't have a bottom line, this is the maximum price. At what point is it too far to back out? They're already doing work, and we're moving forward in a contract, but we don't know how the ultimate price. Do we have an idea, an indication? No guarantees? You know, I'm used to dealing with contracts where you write an offer, you get an acceptance, you know what the bottom line is, and there may be some variables in that, but it's not open-ended. I'm feeling this is open-ended, and I'm feeling unsecure with the number that it's open-ended. And maybe the ad hoc committee can dig further into this, but is there a point that we say we can't back out, so we just have to write the check?
Yes, Director Foley. So maybe to elaborate a little bit on the process. So we will be looking at cost estimates together as we move through the project before we get to the guaranteed maximum price. So that will give us some confidence as to where we're going to end up. The other thing we have is what's known as an open book provision in progressive design build contracts that mean that we are allowed to look at the detailed estimates that the contractor is preparing, and that's what we're doing. So we can go in and look at their material takeoffs or their unit pricing or their markups to see, do we think that that's in accordance with what they should be? So that plays in the negotiation as well. So we're allowed to do that. In terms of off-ramps, we always have an off-ramp. When we start moving forward with some of the big decisions, especially, for example, purchasing the tunnel boring machine, then the off-ramp gets a little bit more difficult.
Right.
But so we do have that possibility as something that we don't want to do. We do have other options within the progressive design build contract that the contractor team has been receptive to, and that is looking, as I mentioned, about contracting some of the work out rather than self-performing it. Kiewit's one of the best contractors in the country, but you pay for what you get. So could we go out and do more competitive bids on other portions of the contract that they intended to self-perform?
Thank you. And the progressive design build, was that their recommendation, our suggestion? How did that come to be? And is this sort of an industry standard?
It's been used very successfully on other types of construction. For example, at San Francisco International Airport, we use it almost exclusively, but that's more on smaller size projects and vertical construction. These types of projects with underground work of this magnitude are very high risk, and as a result of that, the contractors are indicating an unwillingness to commit to a firm fixed price up front because of the risk associated with it. So it's not clear if we would have been able to get other bidders for the project if we hadn't gone progressive design build.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. I really appreciate you going into the detail with me. I look forward to the reports from the ad hoc committee, and I have a level of confidence with the Auditor General. That helps me understand or feel that the numbers are going to be looked at closely and that we'll have some information as that goes forward. So with that, I'm finished with my questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I want to call on Peter Rogoff, who is remote and I think has his hand up. And just a reminder that Peter has joined the advisory team to Carolyn. He's former FTA administrator, and so comes with that very strong background. And so, Peter, did you have some additional comments on some of the recent questions?
Well, thanks, Chair. And yes, I had two things I was going to add to two different pieces of the earlier inquiry, so I'm coming in a little bit late, but I appreciate being recognized. I just want to make the point to give a little amplification to a point that Gary made about progressive design build. The concept, and I emphasize the concept because it doesn't always play out this way, but the concept on having these early dialogue and open book approach with the contractor is it's supposed to eliminate bad things from happening downstream, principally claims, surprises in the contract, where suddenly you may get a higher fixed contract price when you finally settle it in the end game with the contractor, but there should be far fewer surprises because you've done so much of the work in advance. I will say it does not always play out that way. When I was at Sound Transit, at least to date, knocking wood, has been successful on our Linwood Link project. On having it was a little eye-popping the amount that we had to pay in the final price that was agreed upon. But then when we got into some very complicated construction, there have been far fewer surprises, far fewer claims, and the project is currently trending ahead of schedule and under budget. And that's not true of all of those projects. I also wanted to go back to an earlier conversation as it related to potential streamlining measures. And Gary rightly identified some of the things about being considered at the federal level regarding what's called one federal decision and not having to deal with multiple federal agencies on the same project. Sometimes streamlining initiatives can begin at home. And I'm not sufficiently familiar with the local permitting processes in Santa Clara County and the city of San Jose, but I will speak from my experience. More time can be made up by getting really good staff engaged on the local permitting agencies and making sure that everyone can anticipate what local permits are going to be needed and getting them in a timely way so you can get in the ground earlier, or not have any delays for which the contractor then charges you because you couldn't get them in the ground in the time frame you promised in the contract. So yes, should we be looking at federal streamlining efforts? Certainly, but I'm hoping and expecting that we're also talking with and liaising with local permitting agencies, whether it's the county or the city, to making sure that there will be no holdups when it comes to their part of the relationship as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to add on to with Peter is one of the things the federal government does make us do is have agreements with all the local jurisdictions. And we work very closely with the city of San Jose, city of Santa Clara, and any others, even Caltrans where we're crossing their property on specifics. A lot of the specifics, particularly with city of San Jose, is regarding the review process, the permitting and all that, so that it is a smoother flow. So we really do appreciate, that's where the board, as you wearing your elected officials from your cities, play a major role in being able to help us move that project forward. That is absolutely crucial. We have to do a lot of that in the front end. Bernice Alanis was here. Her team helps run a lot of those agreements. And you also work heavily on making sure that we know what the construction plan is, when the hours of work are, what the process is if we want an exception. All those things get done ahead. And so those are the things that we need to continue to just be aware of. And that actually the Auditor General can also take a look at any other areas that we might be able to work on there. Thanks.
Before going on to next members, I just want to say that I think that these questions and comments from the board members are very valuable and are going to be really important as we proceed with the ad hoc and the full board scrutiny of this. I do want to just point out that we are still need to have Greg Richardson make his presentation, and then briefly from the Auditor General and the members of the public. So I don't want to cut people short, but just have everybody conscious of that. Director Lopez.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation, and so I just want to set the context. The first question I'm going to ask, and really the approach that I take with this is, I'm a big believer in this project and the need to the future of transit in our region, but just quality of life to go into the future. But that said, I think a part of that, and everything is interconnected, is to be wise stewards of the public money. And I appreciated Omar's comments earlier, and I appreciate that there may not be a funding measure for this project, and that is clear in the future. But for any VTA funding measures in the future, we need to show that on everything, especially something as public-facing as this, that we are being responsible stewards of the public money. And so it's with that frame in mind that I asked the questions, and this is not intended as advocacy for any predetermined direction, but I'm going to be asking the questions because residents are asking. There's a lot of questions when this came out. So I've been hearing everything from, we should cut the project short and drop the last 1 or 2 stations, or we should go to cut and cover. We should go back. We should put everything on pause and just reevaluate and figure out where it can really save funds. And so, Gary, I appreciate your point, and I can understand that there are costs associated with that would impact the project in even larger ways. But these are questions the public is asking. And you kind of alluded to that at the beginning. I'm wondering if you can speak to that more specifically, maybe not each one of those examples, but really for these things. I think there's a lot of questions in the press coverage, folks asking questions. What would that really look like in terms of time and money? What would the impacts be?
Okay, Director Lopez, we often look on projects at staging it or segmenting it to what we call a minimal operating segment. And in some ways, that's what's happened on this project when it was split into phase 1 and phase 2. And that was a very natural break that was easily accommodated. With this project, it's a little harder to do because most of it's in tunnel alignment. We can't be a part of the tunnel and do the rest of it later. So we could consider, looking at staging some of the other work, some of the work within the current program, such as stations. Do we bring all the stations on at once, or do we consider staggering that in a way that would better accommodate our cash flow and ability to fund it? So we've thought about that, but right now we're doing everything possible to hold to the entire project as currently planned and find a way to fund and finance it. But we could certainly look at those other possibilities of, accommodating of the cost increases that could be deferred. The problem with deferring it is that at the end of the day, it's just going to cost more. So that's one of the downsides of that. And so it's difficult. The one thing I tried to stress in the presentation, in the way I structured the presentation, is to understand what went into defining the project the way it is, and the difficulty of making major changes to that, because it would really set the program back. And so we always have to keep that in mind, that we don't want to do anything that could compromise that. We will continue to look at value engineering, and like, for example, I mentioned eliminating the secondary head house at downtown station. That's a major reduction in cost, and it will reduce the impact of construction on the community. There's all sorts of benefits that are forthcoming from that. Very difficult location to do construction, so the contractor, I think, is very pleased to not have to undertake that. So we can continue to look for opportunities like that, but we don't have a lot of options in that case, and you can see the value engineering savings are, maybe we're talking about $500 million or so going forward. But we'll continue to look for those opportunities too. I don't know if I answered your question entirely, but I tried.
No, and that's okay. I'll leave this as direction for, or feedback for the ad hoc committee. So again, I'm not advocating for any one of these options, but I'm saying very clearly there's a lot of people discussing them and wondering why we're not doing that with what they're seeing as these big cost increases. And I really think to be able to continue to understand the benefits of the project and the benefits of the particular approach that we're taking, to be able to explain, here is what it would really cost in terms of time and money, and why we can't go down any of these paths if that is the case. It's not to say that I believe you, and based off what I've seen and based off the briefings that I've had, but for the public, if we're going to continue to have their support, we're going to really need to lay out those options and why some of those may not be real options at this point. I really think that's important for us to be able to explain our path going forward. And I had a similar question to one of the ones that Director Foley brought up, and I was wondering if we could say just a little bit more about the rise in cost of professional services, what's included in that category, because for both of the stages that we have, it's either the first or the second largest cost increase.
Yeah, so the increase in professional services has really been mainly due to the extension of schedule, which we just have to have additional construction services going forward. I did point out in terms of cost-saving measures that we need to look at, we're seeing the soft costs of projects continuing to increase, and we need to look at a way to better control that. So we're doing that with the current professional services component of the program. We're looking very intently at bringing more efficiency to that process and trying to control these, what we call soft costs. Over the course of time, it used to be that we felt that we could deliver a project on the order maybe 15 to 20% soft costs. It's now getting up over 25%. And so, and some of that is being driven by there's a feeling that the more and more management that we put on projects, the better outcome we'll have. But what's happening is it's just increasing those soft costs, and I'm not sure that we're getting better outcomes from it. So that's an area that we definitely look at, and we'll make sure and break it down in more detail on a line-by-line basis going forward.
I'm interested in exploring that, and you anticipated my next question, which is going to be, I'm curious, I think this would be, again, something for the committee, the ad hoc committee to explore, is whether it's with more staff resources for your team, hiring differently, structuring differently, whether on our side we can have efficiencies, to pick up on Director Lee's questioning, to increase those opportunities to work in parallel. Of course that drives personnel costs up, but I'm wondering if the efficiencies on the project may be such that there would be an overall reduction. So that's something I'm interested in exploring, because if you need more resources from us, if it's gonna deliver the project faster or at less overall expense, it's definitely something I'm interested in having that discussion. One of the things that you alluded to that I thought was very interesting was the difficulties in hiring, and the point I thought that was memorable, that you can't deliver a project like this from home. Certainly agree with that, just not something that I'd considered, some of the challenges within that. So again, I'm wondering if we can get more efficient, targeted, and think how we're structuring that internally to support your team and put you in the best position to be able to deliver. My final piece of feedback for the ad hoc subcommittee, and I'll just end here, is I continue to be very concerned about the increased timeline. And I think I agree with what Director Jane was saying, that I'm not happy about the increased cost, but I'm also not surprised, because as we see on this slide, by far the largest percentage is from market conditions that are no surprise to any of us. At the same time, I think there's serious impacts from delay in terms of the impact to ridership, the level of service that they expect, and the promises we made. But also, as we see on this slide, $750 million are from that delay in time. So it's not just that it's not one or the other. Literally, as you know, as Director Lee said, time is money. So I would be really interested if in having the ad hoc subcommittee, which I think you've got a great representation of the key folks, to really be laser focused on the time delivery and any efficiencies we can have there, because I think that brings savings in both time and overall budget. So I'll just end there. I appreciate it. I look forward to more discussions and more feedback from the ad hoc committee. I know this isn't the end, but thank you for your presentation.
Director Kamei, and then I think we're go to Vice Chair Chavez, and we're hopefully done with this round. So, Director Kamei.
Thank you so much. So I want to start with the good news and really recognize and thank the right-of-way team that did not need any increases. If nothing else, as our CEO mentioned, it was less than what was needed. So thank you. And whatever fairy dust that you can sprinkle on everybody else, please do so. We need the help. I want to just, for the ad hoc committee to know that, I, for one, believe that transit is an investment, and we have to see this through, to Dear Dawn. I mean, I think that is the big push. Let's get it there. And it is an investment in the future. As someone who didn't drive until I was 24, I relied on transit all the time. And I appreciate the explanation on the escalation of issues, but I will say Mayor Blankley has a valid point. Here we are, we listen and gather this information, we can get more in-depth into the weeds, but the public does not understand why. In 3 years, it has almost doubled. They don't understand how it is that happens. I see it as the investment into the future, but I think that we need better explanation. I'm delighted that the Auditor General is going to give us that technical support. We actually need it much more sort of in plain language so that we can share that with our constituents. And if we can't explain it, then it's going to be very, very difficult moving forward. Because I will share my biggest fear is that in 3 years, it'll go to 18 billion, right? I keep thinking, oh, housing, somehow it's going to level off, and it doesn't. It just keeps getting worse. So when you showed us the graph, I thought, oh my gosh, we have a hockey stick. It just is something that, I understand, but I think that we have to do our due diligence to look at professional services, the contingencies, and anything else we can, and use some of that fairy dust to be able to do what we can, because we're not talking about what is being done to either contain or, like bring those costs down. It's like, well, it's up there. Well, I don't think that for the normal person that, kind of is not involved in this, that's not a good explanation. And I don't want to be here in another 3 years and it's 18 billion. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Vice Chair Chavez.
First of all, I just wanted to say to my colleagues that this has been actually I think one of the best meetings we've had on BART maybe ever. And I'm going to say why. I think your comments, your questions, your thinking it's really helpful, and I think going to help us get through the next phase of where we need to go. I wanted to make one comment about why we were so interested in the ad hoc committee. I think one of the challenges that we had, and I think Mayor Blankley raised this, but I think everybody touched on this, which is that the amount of information that we actually need to sift through as a board is so much, and slides feel like almost like a sleight of hand instead of information, in part because these are such deep, thick projects, and there are so many moving parts. In one of the presentations in my briefing, when Gary was talking about, he was showing a graph, and he said, you know, we have 20,000 tasks or something that are attached to this that aren't being shown by the board. That just tells you how complex this is. So that's why we wanted to put the ad hoc committee together, and why we're using the Auditor General as somebody who's familiar with the organization, so that we're not starting from scratch and we can keep up with the staff. Just a couple of issues that I want to make sure I raise. One, I took notes of all of your demands, and so I'm prepared. Just a high level, one thing I just wanted to say to my colleagues is that we want to be able to marry speed, as a member Davis said, speed and quality, and also worker safety. You know, that's going to be, I know, a highlight for all of us. What I want to make sure that we all understand is the contracts that are going to be let, the form in which they're going to be let, design, build, you know, whatever that is, why, along with what are the oversight mechanisms for each of those contracts, and what's the management and the scrutiny process for all of them. So what I'm hoping is that through the ad hoc committee that we understand the structure. And I think, to Gary's point, what happens, I think, when we get nervous is we hire more people to give us more information. And what I really want to see is, I want us to stop the madness there and really understand the structure, along with who of the leadership on the project are our staff versus contractors. Because really, we have contractors checking contractors, checking contractors. And part of again, this is a big project, that's why, but where are the controls, where are the safety, where's the accountability? And then the other issue relative to that is that, so we have hired, I forgot what PMOC stands for, Project Oversight, yeah. So there are reports that are prepared from that consultant.
Yeah, and they're from, FTA hires them.
So there are reports, thank you, that's super helpful. There are reports that they develop that we actually don't see. And so one point that I want to raise is that as part of the committee work, I think we need to take a look at what information is being generated and what gets to the board and how it gets to the board. So, because I think that will raise the level of understanding and then the level of confidence and or feedback and scrutiny, which I think is our job, right? Our job is for that oversight. So anyway, I wanted to just wrap up by saying, really, I think the questions and issues that have been raised have been extremely helpful. Gary, thank you. I know it's so complex, and I know you're trying to make it digest, you know, in digestible bits. And I think at the same time, it's okay to kind of overload us with the written material, which I would, you know, I look forward to seeing as we move through the process.
And thanks. Before we hear from Greg, I just want to add that one of the things we need to think through is the frequency and kind of the milestones in the work of the ad hoc, and the frequency that we come back to the board in really probably another study session like this, as we dive into these issues and have more and more of the answers that we're all seeking. How do we report back to the board and not wait until the end of the process to do so? So on that note, Greg, you've been very patient. Hopefully we aren't going to truncate your efforts too much.
No, Mr. Chair, that's fine. I fully expect that, again, today is more of an overview of a draft of the overall financial plan. I think there's going to be another opportunity, at least one, for us to go into more detail as we get closer to the engineering submission for the FFGA, so that we'll get a little bit more in detail of really the financial plan overall. You've seen somebody join me to my left. This is Nate Masick. This is he is an infrastructure finance director with HDR. Some of you may know Nate. I'm not really sure. He's been a part of the overall BSV project since really phase one, and was instrumental in developing the FFGA on the phase one project. And so he's been a key part of this process for us for the entire time. And I've asked him to come here and give a little bit of an update on the FFGA process, FTA perspective. And then he'll also be here to answer any questions, should we get to that point where we can, on some of the model type questions. But so for now, I'll turn it over to Nate, and we'll begin from there.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Greg, and thanks to the board. So I want to start with a little bit of a background about some of FTA's expectations for financial capacity. So just as you have a PMOC who's reviewing your project management from a technical perspective, FTA also has a financial management oversight consultant who's overseeing the project financial plan. And there is a rating process in place that FTA has for what they call local financial commitment, your ability to pay for the project. But that's not the only thing that they're looking for as part of that process. So they will rate your financial plan and the reasonableness of your financial plan and its ability not only just to fund the capital cost of the project, but also demonstrate that you're able to operate it once you reach the operations phase at the conclusion of construction. To demonstrate that your revenue and expenses are reasonable compared to historical experience. So the financial plan that you put forward has to meet their tests in terms of being reasonable. Same with the capital cost estimate, which will match what is that final blessed cost estimate from the PMOC. They also want to make sure that you're not, robbing Peter to pay Paul to fund one of these projects. So they want to make sure that you are investing in your existing transit system and that you're meeting your transit state of good repair standards, and that you're managing the existing service that you have in order to provide it. So the financial plan requirements, there's a ratings process that they have for that. But at the end of the day, what that includes is a 20-year look forward in terms of what that financial plan looks like. It includes look back at your historical data and explanations for what's contained there. There's also a need to address stress tests or sensitivity analysis that show under alternative scenarios where what's your ability to withstand financial scrutiny by FTA. And that's all part of what gets rated then to make sure that the project is eligible to receive its grant from FTA.
Okay, so with that backdrop, we're going to go over some of the stuff. Some of this information you saw at the board, and I'm going to try to go through it a little bit quickly, since it is not always, it's not all new to you. Again, I want to reiterate, this is really a work in process as we stand today. But to Nate's point before, these are the funding requirements that we've got as it relates to the project, first and foremost, to fund the project. And then secondly, over that 20-year period, ensure that the overall level of service, state of good repair, and the operations and maintenance of the system, of the BART overall system, is also being taken care of, and that nothing is impacting one or the other. Just a quick reference here. We reviewed this again on the October 5th board meeting. This provides the comparison in funding for the original submittal to the FTA to enter the CIG program compared to the current scenario estimated today. And this total reflects the increase of $2.9 billion mentioned previously by Gary, with that increase being funded really two main areas. First, we continue to assume that the CIG program, the federal contribution, will be 49.4%, which translates to $6 billion, or a $1.4 billion increase for the project. And secondly, we're showing a greater increase or greater use of the 2016 Measure B funds. And we'll discuss Measure B a little bit later, but the main point here is that in the original application, we used a portion of the Measure B capacity, only about 11% of the capacity available. And we're now using approximately 22.5% of Measure B dollars for this project, which is still below the board-approved 23.8% and the 25% that's within the measure. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions and the risks that clearly are out there for folks to understand. Two significant assumptions related to the federal grant participation. First is, since we entered the CIG New Starts program, we have assumed that the FTA will participate at a 49.4% level. At this point, just so everyone understands, that is not a guarantee, and that can change as we approach to the time of our submittal, or be an item the FTA responds to once our submittal goes in. Any reduction in that percentage definitely puts pressure on other sources of funding, and that will require us to sort of figure out how to make that work. Secondly, and somewhat related, is the assumption of receiving $500 million each year as part of the full funding grant agreement. And it's not 500 for every year of the FFGA, but for a majority. It's about 11 of the 13 years that we've got programmed. Again, the FTA may decide that this annual amount is not feasible given the budget constraints within their purview, as well as other projects within the system needing to be funded. Two things could happen. It could effectively reduce the amount we receive, because if they keep the time frame within a 10 to 15-year horizon, but they can't seem to fund the full $500 million that we've assumed, therefore the math tells you that the aggregate amount that they're providing will be a little less. So again, going back to what we said before, if they come in with a lesser percentage, then we'll have to figure out other sources and figure out what that solve would be. The other thing that it could do is they might still agree to the full total amount, but go ahead and extend the duration of the FFGA, which would mean they're providing a lesser amount on an annual basis than we've assumed for the 500. That could extend that. By extending the FFGA, that will require potentially more financing to ensure that we can meet the project costs needs, which, as I just said, could lead to increased financing costs that we've not anticipated right now. The other assumption in the model, which is not project-specific, but we've sort of intimated it before, relates to the sunsetting of the 2000 Measure A sales tax and the 2008 Measure B sales tax. Measure A will sunset or end in March of 2036, and for operating purposes within the model, which is not an uncommon practice, we have assumed the operating share of this revenue will continue. We're not calling it Measure A, we're just saying it's a block of revenue that will continue that we have to figure out as time goes on. From a practical perspective, we need to identify that source of revenue to replace Measure A, but not necessarily before we submit for the application. And again, this same concept applies for 2008 Measure B, not as detrimental here or not as impactful because the measure itself sunsets around March of 2042, which is right at the tail end of the 20-year horizon as it relates to the project. As we looked before, this is just showing a project inflow-outflow related to the overall project. The upper portion is the annual estimated outflows. The lower portion reflects the anticipated inflows from the various funding sources. One thing that I always want to make sure people understand, this will change immediately. This is our best estimate of where we see cash flows coming in and out. I'm not necessarily saying the total will change, but the timing of when all of this stuff happens will most certainly change as time goes on. And that's where we'll just need to be able to react and respond accordingly when necessary. The other view of this is on the next slide that we touched on before. Again, here the columns for each year correspond to the previous page, reflecting the anticipated cash inflow by the funding source, and that dark line graph reflects the annual spend for the project and corresponds to the previous page for outflows. As I said before, the focus for me on this is really a depiction that identifies the gaps created in fiscal years 28 through fiscal year 32. And this just simply gives an indication of when we'll be ready to issue some form of project financing to ensure that our annual project spend is met. Right now, the majority of our financing assumptions in the draft plan is in the form of grant anticipation notes and are relatively short-term in nature. And so we're able to secure these notes with the FFGA funding and utilize those proceeds in future years to pay that debt down. Sorry, I moved. All right, so now we'll transition into some of the operating elements related to the project. First is the obligation we have to fund BART O&M as a component of their entire system relative to the impact Phase 1 and Phase 2 has on their overall system. So VTA absorbs certain costs related to the stations within Phase 1 and Phase 2, and in the near future, we will provide an overview of the two main agreements with BART, the comprehensive agreement and the O&M agreement. For today, we'll identify the core costs as O&M, capital, and then VTA other. O&M relates to our share of O&M costs borne by BART for a given year. That's our share of it. Capital relates to the improvements throughout the BART system to ensure proper operations are maintained. And then VTA other relates to costs we incur for station expenses outside the O&M agreement. As you can see on the chart, these combined annual costs will range from approximately $120 million to over $350 million in the future years. This next slide overlays the annual expenses as shown on the previous slide and depicted by the solid line graph with the annual revenue sources to fund these expenditures. Again, the O&M agreement is a little complex in how funds are allocated, and the most straightforward way to explain is to identify the major funding sources, which are basically two. One is the sales tax receipts from the 2008 Measure B, and then the other would be fare revenues shared with VTA related to ridership at Phase 1 and Phase 2 stations. For the fare revenues, it is an area where we continue to evaluate as we prepare for the engineering submittal. We've said before that the FTA seems to prefer what is referred to as the STOPS model, which identifies trips and overall ridership. Although allowed for the FFGA submittal, we do want to evaluate the reasonableness of the revenues being generated. And we are working on other options to reflect more conservative fare revenue and identify its impact on the 2008 Measure Bs, on the Measure B funds. And again, just to reinforce that, as you're looking at that bottom section, which is the fare revenues, as that growth continues, what we want to be able to do is identify a little bit more appropriate starting point of the revenues that we anticipate, building into what we potentially would believe to be a return of ridership of some value or some variation of pre-COVID, and then from there use the current STOPS model sort of growth pattern from that base point forward. So we're not necessarily going to see the exact revenue stream that you're seeing here, but we need to understand the impact that that could have on the 2008 Measure B funds. Another source that's on this that might be a little confusing is referred to the interest earnings and other, and it's really more the other that is of interest here. On the expense side, every year we submit a payment to BART for the budgeted capital expenditures. And for most years, like many agencies, actual spend related to the capital budget will be lower. And so each year we receive a credit for the unspent monies that we have delivered to BART. And so what we've done is factored in that reconciliation into the process to receive those monies every year so that we've got a proper flow of monies in and out. The other item of note for this particular graph is you'll see these hashed segments, which is titled the 2008 Measure B fund balance. So as we began fiscal year 24, the balance in our 2008 Measure B fund was about $300 million. So for those years where you're seeing expenses exceeding the funding sources where those hashed items exist, we are effectively utilizing that balance to meet the obligation for that particular year. And so by the end of this 20-year period, right now we're projecting to maintain a fund balance of approximately $260 million. So now on the operating side of the transit operations, and this is the last of the three elements that we talk about from a project feasibility. So just as we've done and we've talked about on our 10-year projections, this exercise right now is pretty linear. The assumption within the model is to maintain our current service level. In practice, and again, I want to make sure everyone understands this, in practice, this will likely not be the case. We've already seen a presentation on our visionary network, and we know that there will be some modifications potentially that will be made. But from a modeling perspective, for what we'll submit through the FTA and FFGA, it's really to maintain your current service level and maintain that historic experience on both revenues and expenses. So with that as the main premise and utilizing our fiscal year 24 and 25 budget assumptions, expenses are then shown to grow at about a 2% year-over-year average over the course of this particular time, ultimately approaching about $860 million in future years. On the revenue side for transit operations, we are projecting to have enough revenues to support the operating expenses as shown on the previous page. And the main drivers, with no surprise here, of course, is going to be our sales tax revenues. So the 1976 sales tax is projected to grow to over $400 million by 2043. In 2024, it stood at about $290 million. TDA is projected to grow at about a 2% average, up to about $184 million in 2043. And then, of course, the STA. And then fair revenue. Fair revenue, still low as a percentage of total, but still estimated to be about $44 million in 2043. And then just to continue the note, just make sure everyone understands, the 2000 Measure A, which is that dark blue hatched area on the top, that represents about $60 million in fiscal year 24. In 2035, which is the last full year of receipt, it's about $76.3 million. And so to maintain operations beyond 2036, a new source will be needed to sustain at an average of about $77 million each year. And the last piece on the operations side is related to our investment in capital investment for operating and system needs. And these investments are projected to be funded via grants and transit operating dollars over these particular years. The current assumption right now is that the capital needs are based on what we refer to as our low or constrained skip model. We are evaluating the impact of this assumption on our fleet age to measure the impact on our FTA rating regarding this state of good repair assessment. So there might be alterations we'll make to this overall capital piece if we need to increase the score or the rating as it relates to the state of good repair. And then one final note just on this overall operations piece, for not just this, but also the expenses and the revenues. None of the operating results are being impacted by the project, which to me is a very important distinction, or the operations of the project. And for instance, when I say that, the 2000 Measure A sunset issue is an issue with or without the BSV2 project. It's a solution that we were going to have to find no matter what. So the impact of BSV2 as far as impacting one or the other is not there. And so this is just from an operations perspective, and really any changes we make to the operations when we discuss the visionary network and we talk about having to find other sources for it, those are mutually exclusive of anything related to the BSV project. And so we always would have to find those solutions no matter what. The distinction I'm making here is that the project itself is not creating any of these issues, which I think is an important distinction from the FTA's perspective. Quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about sales tax measures. So this slide is simply showing all the projected revenues for each of the different sales taxes. And again, the point here is in 2036, the 2000 Measure A is gone, and that hatched area is, again, that amount that needs to be in place to ensure that our operations stay in place. So quickly on the 2000 Measure A, we talked a little bit about this at the board meeting. This is a slightly revised chart than the one we reviewed at the board. So the main focus is the current UCLA projections are showing additional capacity for Measure A of about $623 million. The forecast figures, just so everyone understands, represents tax receipts in the year of receipt. It does not include any interest earnings that would be accumulating over time. So the actual number will probably be more, but we're dealing with just the actual receipts. And for each of these columns, the lower section reflects the allocated amount within the model to the BSV2 project. And so for the 2022 June, it would have been part of the 2022 application into New Starts. And for 2023, it's the current estimate of funds needed today. The upper section is funds used or allocated to other projects within the Measure A program. Most significant use today is really on the East Ridge to BART Regional Connector and then debt service. The middle or the hatch section represents the amount within each version of the model of Measure A capacity being held. Right now, we're holding it for BSV2. So for the 2022 submittal or the 2020 UCLA column, that was approximately $426 million. For the current version, the unused capacity sits at $932 million. And so as the model is refined in anticipation of the engineering submittal, some of this capacity may be needed to ensure a successful FFGA submittal. I have 7 minutes. On the 2016 Measure B, again, this was what we saw at the board meeting. Total increase estimated at about $2 billion. The columns here are pretty similar to what we just saw on the Measure A, although I probably reversed them. In this case, the lower section represents available funds for all programs, excluding BSV2. The upper section is for BSV2 under each forecast. And then that middle hatched section represents the available capacity with Measure B. So it's identifying what is available for B. And at the time, as we referenced earlier, in the original submittal, we only used about 13% of what was available to us from Measure B. So now we're using more of that capacity along with the increased estimate as far as the proceeds. The importance here, I think, is although more Measure B funds are being used for BSV2, again, within the prescribed 23.8%, that increase is not taking away from the other programs, which leads to this next slide. So the final slide related to Measure B shows each of the programs with their relative dollar allocation based on each of the revenue forecasts. One note when we talk about revenue forecast, this is all in year of receipt. So this is not going back to bringing it back to 2017 values. Most people in here who were a part of the 2016 Measure B when it first went through remember a number somewhere in the range of $6.3 to $6.6 billion. That was the present value of those anticipated receipts brought back to 2017 value. What we're doing here is showing year of receipt for each of those different forecasts. Now, in our haste in putting this together, we failed to identify the actual percentage on this. So if you want to see me after this, I'd be more than happy to give you the exact percentages that are identified for each of these programs. But a couple of things to keep in mind with this chart. The revenues used were specific to the forecast dollars and, again, do not include interest accumulation. So the actual dollars available for Measure B will be more than what you're seeing here, what you saw on the previous slide, because interest will accrue over time for those particular dollars. This does not take into consideration some of the off-the-top items of administrative costs and debt service. So both of these amounts will come off the top of actual projected revenues. That's how the measure was identified. So if you got $100 and you got $3 of administrative costs, $3 comes off the top, and then that remaining $97 is then allocated based on the percentages. So that off the top number could change depending on if there's any debt service or just overall administrative costs associated with. But what it does not do is change the relative comparison when you look at these graphs for each based on the forecast. But again, the total dollars would change based on those projections. And again, I think the main point of this graph is to reinforce that with the new 2023 UCLA forecast, each category is seeing an increase in capacity relative to the 2020 forecast, which was the most recent. And then last thing is just to identify some next steps. As I said before, this is sort of a draft, a work in process. So we'll continue to evaluate some of the assumptions and the model and their impact. We'll finalize the overall project cost, and then we'll finalize the financing approach and an overall update of the model. I do intend to bring more information back to the board as we get closer to that FFGA submittal, because I want to make sure everyone sees kind of the process we're going through, and then ultimately submit the funding plan for engineering submittal. Additionally, I want to reinforce also that things that we're going to bring back to this board, because I think they are necessary for discussions, are more information regarding Measure A, especially given the increases in projected receipts, as well as the Measure B program. We've gotten to a point now where I think some more detailed conversations about how Measure B program is being monitored and identified, and how those funds are being allocated, I think is an important conversation for us to have, especially as it relates to this particular project. And as I said before, and it's already been asked of us, is to bring at least to A&F and ultimately to the board, just a review of the two main agreements that we have with BART, the comprehensive agreement and then the O&M agreement for BART. And with that, I have 3 minutes left. Good luck.
Well, sort of.
Yeah, just real quickly, what Greg did say was right. So right now, based on the information that you were presented, and we've also given everything over to FTA, they're going to be working with us over the next few months to determine what that final number is for our budget, for our cost estimate for the project, and the schedule that we'll be putting into the FFGA. At the same time, we'll be doing a financial plan that will reflect whatever that number is. So right now, this is the 12.2. It could be different, as I said. But before we submit that, we will come back to the board, and there'll be another workshop very similar to this to talk about the changes, what, on the risk assessment, where the new number is, should there be a new number, and also the financial plan in more detail. And I think what's most important, I know it's very important to Bart, is also to really understand the Measure B operating, which is very, very confusing on what we owe. How, I don't think this board, except for a few who probably had to sit through the torture of listening how we work through the funding of our BART agreement and the operating agreement. So we will have to go through that with you. So you're all very well aware of that, as well as what's going on with Measure A. We will get the bids in for the East Ridge extension soon. So that will play into, if we're up or whatever, we'll be needing to look at. Measure A is helping support a lot of that. So we'll be coming back with information as it goes on. So definitely in a few months, we'll be going through not exactly all of this again, but really where we are now and going forward. So I really appreciate all your time spent on this today. And if there's any questions for Greg, and then Nate will actually be helping others review our plan and making sure that we get through the FTA well for our financial plan.
And we're not going to have time to go through a full round of questions to Greg at this time. And so just so everybody knows, I'm going to call on Director Jimenez and then hear from the public. I think we only have one speaker, and then briefly from our Auditor General, and still try and do all that in the next few minutes. Director Jimenez.
I just have a very brief question. So obviously the $500 million of $500 million that we're going to be dependent on from the federal government, right? I think it's one of the earlier slides. And that's obviously long-term. What I'm curious about is, I suspect I know the answer, but that's susceptible to political changes in Washington, right? And so acknowledging that, what are we doing, how are we strategizing around that to make certain that maybe the local delegation is doing something, is going to be doing something to be helpful and to the extent possible to make sure that that stands firm with the changing political winds that may eventually come to Washington, because it's obviously in disarray, to put it nicely. And so that's going to be important.
That is a true statement. We will definitely engage all of our lobbyist efforts to ensure that we have a direct connection with Washington, as well as our local contingent, to ensure that whatever we can do to make sure people see this project and get it within the president's budget in the OMB every year, to ensure the funding is there. The risk is still going to be there. I mean, it will come down to a dollars perspective from the Fed side. And so what we've got to figure out is in these next several months is, if it changes, how do we mitigate, and what's the impact in that mitigation? With an understanding that when we go forward, we will be asking for the 500. We're not going to assume it's less. We will make them say no. And so we'll continue to push that. And so with anything that we do as far as the submittals, any help that we can get from lobbyists, legislative support, anything else from that perspective, we will certainly engage all parties that can help in that process.
Yeah, so right now, even currently right now, we're lobbying to get the 500 that was in the president's budget allocate to us. Whether we get that, we don't know whether we're going to get that full amount or whatever it will be. Every year, based on the appropriations, we'll know sort of what we're going to get. We will have an FFGA schedule of when we'll get it, but the FTA is really they're going to try to cover all the projects they have. The big push will be making sure that the program is fully funded to cover all the FFGAs and allow for some room for additional ones. I will say right now, the pressure with the federal government is that there are a lot of big projects who've seen escalation in their rates. So there's been a lot of pushback by FTA not to go close to 50% on the projects, even though we're allowed to go all the way up to 60% to push that pushback. So we may see them participate at a lower rate. That's why we have some contingency left in our funding. We also are doing we have the value engineering we haven't put through, but I do want you to be aware that early indications are, because they're pushing back on all the projects, we're probably not going to get the 49%, but we are working through that. And also, we don't know whether they sort of have a 10-year rule. They don't go longer than 10 years, but they're starting to see projects that are taking longer than 10 years, so they can put the schedule out. So they're looking at all these other FFGAs and what can they fit in. And so for them, that will be it. It will be very important for not just our legislative delegation, but our business community, our chambers, everybody else really support the project, and that's why it's very important for us to always be clear, and we're going to be doing this for 13 years and going out to DC visiting everybody to try to make sure that we get the money to finish this project. Oh, so, okay. Do you want Peter Rogoff connect? Peter was very much a person who had to deal with this on many projects, so he has a couple comments on this.
I'll be very quick because I know we want to move forward. I just want to reemphasize something that Carolyn just said. I happen to have been the Federal Transit Administrator that signed the FFGA for the first BART extension of Berryessa. There was an extraordinary groundswell from the business community, all of the political leaders, all corners of the delegation to give the project momentum, and that all needs to be rekindled. And if we're going to move this forward, especially for the amount of money we're seeking and the percentage that we're seeking. And I think very importantly, Board Member Jimenez's question really plays into the importance of time. You could go back and forth and haggle with the FTA over a very long time over this dollar amount versus that dollar amount and push yourself into more political uncertainty that could come with political change. And right now, we're already on a schedule to hope to get an engineering commitment toward the end of 2024. There's obviously going to be an election in November of 2024, and all of these elements need to be considered by the board as they settle with the FTA on what that dollar level is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So trying to move quickly here, I think we're going to move to public comments. As right now, we may only have one speaker. Liz Ames, who is BART Director, District 6. Welcome, Director Ames.
Thank you. So I am your director. There's 9 directors. I'm one of 9, and I represent Southern Alameda County. And I am shocked to see the number go from 6 to 9 to 12 billion in 3 years. And my concern is it really starts with the selection of the type of construction to do this project. I am a civil engineer, so I have some experience in this. So the constructability is, we made this decision to go with a single bore versus the twin bore. And I see I only have 30 seconds. So quickly, I think the problem is when 20 years from now, we look back and we'll say, well, why did we go down 8 stories? And people are going to say, well, it was the businesses that didn't want to be disrupted. And I would say that this needs to be reevaluated. It's a better design with twin bore. That was what BART wanted initially, and it got pushed down underground politically. So there are ways to work with the businesses, and pardon me for going over this a little bit. I've worked in Palo Alto, and I've worked with businesses on construction projects. It's very serious. You have to have a delivery plan, a garbage plan. You have to know how not to have loud noises during the lunch hour. These kind of things can happen, and I think we need to work with the businesses and maybe do another value engineering analysis on this, because I think this project will probably double in cost. This is my experience working with consultants. They give you a low number. And we also have a sole source contract with the contractor, so this is not competitive. Thank you so much. Hopefully you could reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just briefly before I wrap up, I'd like to invite Scott Johnson up to give a very brief summary of what his role is going to be in supporting the board and the ad hoc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board, and distinguished staff members as well as members of the public. My name is Scott Johnson. I'm VTA's Auditor General. And before I make my brief comments, I just wanted to clarify and make sure the public is aware that the Auditor General's office is an independent body. I'm not an employee of VTA, nor members of our staff, our team on the VTA. VTA actually made a decision years ago to outsource their Auditor General office, and so I'm an independent certified public accountant working at MGO as a partner there for the last 9 years. Prior to that, I was working in local government for almost 25 years. I was a finance director for San Jose and familiar with many these types of projects in the billions of dollars. And I'd also like to introduce Brian Mayhew. Brian, can you raise up your hand? Brian recently joined our team, and Brian is the former CFO for MTC, so we're really glad to have him. He's been involved at MTC for 22 years as a CFO, and he's been involved at some level in over $20 billion in public projects through MTC. So as the chair mentioned, the plan would be that the independent auditor general and our team assist the board and assist this committee. And we're planning to do that by assisting the committee and the board in identifying and mitigating risk, looking at issues that you're concerned about, and really drilling down into the project costs, the project forecasts, the project schedule. Brian and I were also taking very detailed notes of the comments that were raised, by the board, and we will continue to seek input from the board members. We plan to work directly with the chair and vice chair of the committee. We'll be helping in developing the agenda for these committees. We'll be coordinating with staff and consultants on presentations. So this will be in partnership with the general manager, the agency council, and the BART project leadership and management staff in making presentations. We will review those prior to them being presented to make sure, as was mentioned earlier, they're clear and understandable to the public. We will also develop our own analysis. As you may recall, the board charged the Auditor General through the work plan, as the chair mentioned, to do a comprehensive risk assessment of this project, as well as to do ongoing monitoring of the project. And so we've already started that. We've been looking at literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. I want to give a shout out to Krishna Davies. He's been very helpful in providing information and in meeting with us, and we continue to meet on a regular basis with many of the staff members and consultants that are related to this project. So with that, I think, given the interest of time, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of how the Auditor General's Office is here to support the committee and ensure transparency and listening to your concerns so there are no surprises. Thank you.
And lastly, I'd just like to encourage any board members who may have any follow-up questions or direction for the committee to provide them through staff to the committee in writing and supplementing the comments today, which are all being captured. So on that note, I want to thank everybody. This has been a really valuable meeting, and we have a lot of work to do. Thanks.